Martin. Joe, you can come to, yeah. Sorry. Joe, there is a change of point. This is that we are going to skip the questions. Yeah. So then you can, after your intervention, after Robert Moïse, I call the new session and you can go. Okay. And then the questions are at the end. Okay, yeah, sure. Okay, so that. Bonjour, on va reprendre. Pour ceux qui sont là. Bon. Alors, on a vraiment...
So we are going back and we will be talking about, we will continue our discussion. We have talked about the false solutions. We also have a lot of testimonies on behalf of the local communities who have been very much impacted and affected by this project. So the question that I have right now, we actually have a lot of different witnessing. So a lot of testimonies, so this is a systematic approach. We have things like that in Asia, in Latin America, in Africa. However, the medias are not really talking about this. We cannot find a lot of articles in the media talking about this. So how comes that here in Europe, we are still continuously financing these types of action that have this negative impact? So in order to answer to this question, we will have Joe Eisen from Rainforest Foundation UK, who will be with us today, and we will also have a couple of other speakers who will be with us online.
Thank you, Theo. Right, is my presentation up and ready?
I don't know.
Perfect, thank you.
Okay, perfect.
Thank you.
Okay.
Okay, well, hello everybody. It's extremely nice to be here. I realise I've got the graveyard shift after lunch presentation spot, but never mind. I hope you're well fed and energised. I'm director of the Rainforest Foundation UK. We are nominally co-hosting this event with Survival International and Minority Rights Group. But I have to say, most of the legwork has been done by Survival, and we should in no way underestimate the logistical undertaking that's gone into this. Getting so many different perspectives from around the world. And it's all gone pretty smoothly so far, so huge respect for the amount of work that Survival have put into this. Just before I begin, I mean, I think I'm quite humbled. We've been working on the issue of conservation and human rights in Africa for many years now. And it's quite humbling to hear the different experiences from around the world. It's also pretty inspiring, actually, to know that there's a prospect that different people might not have to suffer in silence, and there's growing momentum around this. So my presentation is pretty short and pretty top line, so forgive me for that. I've entitled it International Donors, Biodiversity Conservation and Nature-Based Solutions, and I've used a quote from somebody else on this: "Our land is not your solution." So I've worked for the Rainforest Foundation for 12 years, and I've been director since the beginning of 2020. Doing lots of field work with our partners, including APEM, who were the first presenter this morning. We heard many reports of social problems around protected areas in the Congo Basin. In 2015, we finally got the funding together to actually look into this question more systematically. And we did a study with the University of Helsinki, looking at the social and human rights impacts of 34 protected areas in the Congo Basin. There's currently about 200, so a pretty decent sample. What we found that out of 34 protected areas, there was no evidence of any consultation whatsoever with local and indigenous communities before those parks were created. None whatsoever, let alone obtaining their free, prior and informed consent. We found no evidence whatsoever. We found that 26 of those protected areas suffered reports of economic and physical displacement of forest communities residing in these protected areas. And finally, we had reports in about half of those protected areas of severe human rights abuses, and in many cases there was no information available to say that there wasn't. So I think what we did was we were able to, for the first time, certainly in Africa, to systematically document that this was a systemic problem. One particular extreme case is in the Salonga National Park in the DR Congo. Now this is known as an emblematic protected area. It's a UNESCO World Heritage Site. It's huge. It's the biggest rainforest protected area in Africa and one of the biggest in the world. It also has funding from the United States, from Germany, and from the European Commission, among many other donors. And well, what we found was pretty shocking. With our local partners, in just 11 communities that bordered the park, we found 11 cases of murder by so-called eco-guards of local populations. We found 9 cases of rape in the 11 villages. And out of 250 people that were interviewed, we found 63 cases of physical abuse and torture of the local population. Now, it's important to note that all of these funding organizations, entities, have pre-existing human rights policies, due diligence processes. Go on their websites, you'll see some really fantastic documentation about how they integrate human rights principles into their programs. I think what our research showed that this doesn't actually manifest on the ground. And by and large, what it brings into focus is severe problems with the current protected area funding model that we see in Central Africa. There's a huge lack of transparency and accountability. It turns out that many of these human rights abuses were known about, particularly by WWF and some of the funding organizations. Of course, WWF is a co-manager of the park. When these human rights abuses surfaced, there was very little understanding of who was responsible for what and who communities could go to for redress. It very much laid bare the inadequacy of international funding institutions, safeguards, procedures and standards. And ultimately, what it shows is that, as we've heard pretty much throughout the sessions today, is that it's based on a very fundamentally flawed model of conservation based on wildernesses. And if you can see that map at the bottom of the screen, one of the things that we do as an organization is we support local communities to map their lands. We equip them with smartphones, and they go into the forest and document where they fish, where they hunt, where their customary rights are. And what we've shown, we've so far supported around 1,000 communities to map their land, about 9 million hectares. And what it shows is there's pretty much no part of the Congo Basin region that isn't under some kind of customary claim or usage. So what do? We had the results from the study, which was rigorous and pretty well done. We went on a tour of the major international funding agencies, such as the US, Germany, European Commission. And the reaction at first, I always liken it to the 7 stages of grief. First of all, there was anger, that we should be questioning its purist conservation model. Second, there was denial, that there was problems in our methodology and how could anything be wrong. And third, there was deflection, that it wasn't ultimately their responsibility. It was the responsibility of the governments in these countries. And I would say it wasn't until the BuzzFeed exposés, which I guess most of you are familiar with, that this kind of issue in this campaign really took off and we gained traction. All of a sudden, the donors couldn't push this under the carpet. It was a political issue now. And there followed an avalanche of reports and media exposés and investigations by the various government agencies. For example, there was investigations in the US Congress. There were questions asked at the European Parliament, in the Bundestag. Lots of visits to Longo by lots of human rights experts. But what happened as a result of this? I think it's important to say that there has been some very limited steps by international donors to address the human rights impacts of their conservation programs. So, for example, in the US, there's now new requirements in the appropriations framework, which basically conditions $300 million of international biodiversity conservation funding. Now, that funding has to show that it's respected the land rights of local communities, that new conservation projects have obtained the free, prior and informed consent. There's talk of a new USAID accountability mechanism so that communities can have a clear way of bringing problems around conservation areas to the attention of donors and political figures. There's been some strengthened partnership agreements, new clauses that the international conservation organizations need to abide by. It's important to say, though, they're still pretty weak, and in the case of Germany, for instance, they don't even feel bound to publish what's in these partnership agreements. So we have to take it on good faith that they're working towards human rights, and that's a pretty bad position to be in, I think. We've also seen some of the first convictions of eco-guards in the DR Congo. Again, it's a sort of test case for how victims can obtain justice. But just to say, I mean, we've worked in 11 communities, and there's 600 communities that are impacted by the Longo National Park. So one conviction out of potentially thousands of human rights abuses is a drop in the ocean. We've been told that the National Parks Agency in the DR Congo now has a new human rights unit. Sounds great. No one's seen any terms of reference for it. And there's lots of talk of new grievance mechanisms where communities can raise their concerns with park managers. again, no evidence that this is actually manifested on the ground. But the paradigm persists. These measures that have been undertaken so far are just tinkering around the edges of a failing and colonial conservation system. For example, there's this leaked version of a new proposed ECE conservation program in Africa that's based on the same concept of conservation landscapes, trickle-down benefits, community development, and of course, our sister organization, Rainforest Foundation Norway, recently published a study that found that only 0.1% of climate funding goes towards indigenous and local community land rights. Let that sink in, 0.1%. And this is when indigenous peoples and other local communities are said to manage 80% of the world's biodiversity. So very quickly, this has been touched upon, been very touched upon. We've estimated that the 30-30 is a huge step in the wrong direction. 297 million people could be directly impacted by this plan, as Laura said. We're being sold OECMs as a possible pathway to reaching the 30%. These are very untested, ill-defined, and don't cut it, really. And of course, globally now, this event is very much part of it, there's growing pushback from IPLC groups, scientists, and only last week, a grouping of 49 conservation funders wrote to the CBD parties expressing their concern about this. Nature-based solutions, as Simon said in his presentation, it's based on highly inflated estimations of the climate mitigation potential of nature-based solutions, which is dangerous, and it's generating lots of corporate interest. For example, Shell plans to offset 20% of an expansion in its gas business through nature-based solutions. Mark Carney has started a voluntary task force on carbon rights. Voluntary carbon markets, and that aims to generate a carbon market of $100 billion a year in offsets. And of course, there's problems with sequestration reversals in a warming climate, as we've seen, and also a huge risk to biodiversity projects from plantations. So, in conclusion, what do international donors need to do? Well, first of all, reject the 30-30 plan outright, unless there's much stronger guarantees and binding targets for indigenous and local communities. For existing protected areas, how can we talk about expanding protected areas when we don't know the performance of those that exist today? How about we can introduce a grading system that if they haven't demonstrated that they've consulted with communities, mapped their lands, then they get defunded, or these areas get handed back to local and indigenous communities. Improve, strengthen financing contracts, making comprehensive and accessible grievance mechanisms, and that means not just at the field level, making them culturally accessible, but also having clear lines of accountability, so that when a community raises a problem, they know ultimately who it is they need to solve this problem. Keep MBS out of the UNFCCC and post-2020 global biodiversity processes until they've been subjected to proper scrutiny. And last of all, increase direct funding from climate and biodiversity funding for IPLCs. Now, if you increased it from 0.1% to 1%, that would mean an extra $300 million per year going directly to indigenous and local communities. And that's what we're going to be working towards in advance of this climate COP, and we will be sharing this with you in due course. So thanks very much for your time.
Thank you, Joe. So now we have Celeste Alexander. Do we have her? Yeah, okay. So Celeste Alexander is a PhD candidate in anthropology at Princeton University in the United States. And we will talk more about actually press coverage. Hello.
Hi. I guess I just want to thank you and thank everyone who worked hard to bring the Congress together. Can you hear me very well? The microphone seems...
Yeah, we can hear you perfectly. Yeah.
Oh, you can?
Yeah, and also we can see you perfectly, so...
Okay.
Which is quite weird these days, so...
Okay. So I just want to say I'm grateful to have an opportunity to stand in solidarity. I'm sorry, this is actually echoing a lot on my end, so I'm going to take the headphones off.
Okay.
Okay?
Yeah, I can hear you. Say something.
Okay.
Yeah. Perfect.
All right, I'm sorry about that.
Don't worry.
So I'm going to just try. So I just want to say that I'm grateful to be standing in solidarity with a growing coalition that's led by Indigenous, Black, Brown, and Asian persons from historically marginalized communities who have long been disproportionately targeted by continuing and increasing militarized forms of colonial fortress conservation, and who as such also stand to be unjustly impacted by current plans to push through a massive and rapid expansion of protected areas into their homes and homelands. As currently conceived, the global 30 by 30 target is not global at all, but follows familiar fault lines, the deepening of which can only result in a more profoundly divided planet. So I'm a cultural anthropologist from the United States, currently completing a dissertation concerning biodiversity conservation, international tourism, human-wildlife conflict, and issues of cultural representation in what are today the western borderlands of Serengeti National Park. As we speak, on the opposite side of the greater Serengeti ecosystem, there are currently plans to evict up to 82,000 residents from Ngorongoro Conservation Area, most of whom are Indigenous Maasai pastoralists. And as a recent study from the Oakland Institute makes plain, a report by the IUCN, the UNESCO World Heritage Center, and the International Council on Monument and Sites largely set the stage for the government plan. The report from IUCN and others characterizes the Ngorongoro ecology as a crisis and its human residents as a catastrophic population, referring, for example, to the movements of pastoralists as rampant migratory patterns and a looming threat. The Oakland Institute questions this narrative, arguing that Ngorongoro ecology does not presently appear to be in any serious decline, at least if the health of wildlife populations is any indication. This opens the question of what exactly are the baselines and indicators of ecological crisis in a particular ecological space, and what kind of scalar politics are involved in declaring one? Or is it simply enough for the IUCN to declare itself the, quote, global authority on the status of the natural world and the measures needed to safeguard it, and allied any burden of proof? If it's the latter, this is a great deal of concentrated power. So what precisely is the role of the IUCN? And who is to hold such a mammoth organization accountable, not only with regard to their claims about the state of the ecology and what should be done about it, but also, quite frankly, for the dog whistling? I'd now like to shift gears a little bit and speak about some upsetting events which had been going on as of late in many of the villages where I conducted ethnographic fieldwork near the western border of Serengeti National Park. I'd also like to draw attention to how national and international news sources represent these events and the lives that they concern very differently. I want to be sure you can hear me because I still hear this terrible echo.
No, we can hear you perfectly.
Oh, wonderful. Okay. So in January of 2020, a number of villages along the western border of Serengeti National Park made both national and international news after a pride of lions reportedly wounded 2 people, killed 80 cows, 25 goats, 21 sheep, and a pig in what was at that time the latest in a devastating spate of attacks which had been taking place with unusual frequency and intensity for well over 2 months. The lion attacks in the Tanzanian newspaper, the Daily News, features a graphic photograph of adult male lion sprawled across the grass, cradling between his front paws the mangled body of a cow ripped in two. The names of the villages directly impacted are listed in the article Robanda, Park Niagoti, Makandusi, Niachoka, and Kwitete. Notably, the first few villages listed here make up 4 out of 5 of the villages which today comprise the Ikono Wildlife Management Area, or WMA, a nominal community-based conservation or natural resource management area. The Ikono WMA, its name a portmanteau which combines that of Ikoma and Nata peoples, has been a central focus of my field work, and many people here have welcomed me into their homes. In the months leading up to this particularly severe attack, one story after another in Tanzania's Mwananchi newspaper to an intensifying problem which had been going on for some time. According to the paper, on November 4th, 2019, lions killed 16 cows in Robanda village and injured at least 3 more. On December 3rd, 2019, lions killed 19 cows, 26 goats, 30 sheep, and a pig in Niachoka and Fiore villages. On December 21st, 2019, lions injured 2 people and killed a number of livestock in Robanda, Niachoka, Bukore, Nianungu, and Kwitete villages, including 25 cows in Kwitete alone. In Kiambahi ward, 26 cows were slain by lions, along with 49 goats, 12 sheep, and a pig. In January of 2020, according to the Daily News, a week prior to the attack, which I started with, another lion attacked and injured 6 people, human beings. Fast forward 1 year later to January of this year, Mwananchi reported that 1 person was injured and at least 16 cows were killed by lions in Niachoka and Robanda, this even after more lions had already been translocated to a new national park the previous March, following 2 additional attacks within a week of each other by a pride of 36 lions who were reportedly caught and trapped by wildlife officers in Niachoka and Bukore. The only international news I came across on these events at the time was an article from Agence France Presse, published in The Guardian around the same time as the Tanzanian Daily News article with which I began. At the top of the Guardian article, and by the way, I want to say this is years after John Vidal had left Guardian, so it's not about, I think he had a very different kind of reporting than what I'm about to share. At the top of the Guardian article is what looks to be a stock photo of a female lion perched on the branches of a tree. From the photograph, one wouldn't know that the matter at issue immediately concerned villages, people, or their livestock at all, as none of it so much as make it into the frame. The article focuses on how lions' lives have been impacted by humans at a global level or as if in general, and pays no mind to the reverse. Although the Guardian article quotes wildlife researchers, it does not name the villages or any of the persons directly impacted. Nevertheless, the article does imply that people, specifically African people, are in some way to blame for the suffering of lions in general, and by implication, it would seem for their own suffering as well. Caption beneath the unidentified lion reads, "Lions are under pressure in Africa as humans encroach on their territory." While duly noting that the global lion population slumped 43% over the last 2 decades, the article fails to mention that the same data set from which this figure is drawn is also quite clear, that in contrast, the Serengeti lion population in particular saw an estimated 35% increase over the same period between 1993 and 2014. This article, the Tanzanian Daily News article with which I began offers a different theory about what might be causing the recent surge in lion attacks, suggesting, quote, that the number of wild animals is reported to have significantly increased in Western Serengeti in recent months, thanks to ongoing conservation campaigns. Although the political and ecological landscape is far more complex than I've been able to allude to here, and one must, of course, be careful in such a complex ecology about reducing matters to a single cause, the suggestion raised by the Daily News does resonate with the reasoning and even the explicit goals of prevailing international tourism-based conservation. Well-known European conservation organization who serves as an official facilitator for the Ikono Community Wildlife Management Area makes the logic behind the WMA very clear on their website. communities benefit from WMAs, they argue, because these areas attract wildlife, which makes them attractive for tourism, which then generates money. Annually, this area generates up to $1 million US. And that's just the WMA, by the way. There's another big source of funding there that's quite significant. WMAs, oh, I'm going on. Sorry, I'll just skip that.
Yeah.
So I don't mean to suggest that the WMA is strictly responsible for drawing wildlife to the area. As I said, I think it's a complex ecology or social factors that I can't account for here. And I do want to mention that there is another very important conservation and tourism actor in the area as well, a multi-billionaire private investor and philanthropist with a 350,000 acre land concession who boasts about bringing the western corridor of the Serengeti back from the brink of ecological crisis. An article on the investor's website attests to a fourfold increase in wildlife on the concession over the 15-year period since 2003, accomplished through a focus on anti-poaching, law enforcement, research, community partnerships, and sustainability.
Celeste, so I have to interrupt you. You have just 1 other minute, if that's
No
okay
problem.
to conclude. Sorry.
No problem. So from their point of view, this represents a recovery of wildlife previously decimated by poaching. Baselines for recovery are difficult to establish. What I can say is that no one I spoke with could recall ever having encountered so many lions in historical memory. I also know that the various investors and the facilitator of the WMA are looking for ways for people and wildlife to coexist, and I don't believe anyone wanted this situation. The investor and the WMA facilitator, for example, are helping to patrol the area for lions and other dangerous animals, including elephants. The issue certainly seems bigger than any one party. What seems worth asking, however, is whether meeting the species and landscape-specific market desires of foreign tourists can be equated with the conservation of actual biodiversity. Mordecai Ogada's interventions on this are absolutely crucial, and I believe he's speaking on the next panel. So I want to just end with one tiny thing, and that's to say, exactly a month ago to date, 3 young children were killed by lions near Ngorongoro when they were out looking for lost cattle. The newspapers this time, it seemed to be every one of them, no matter from where, did not grieve the loss of these children, but blamed nomadic communities for not taking proper precautions and for recklessly tasking children with taking cows out to graze. The Serengeti, in truth, is a place where lions are, by all accounts, flourishing relative to every other place on God's green earth. Thanks.
Thank you very much, Celeste. Thank you. Actually, it's very interesting because, well, the question of the panel is what is the role of the media and of the international donors in not only, well, funding, but also reproducing this conservation model. And so we have Celeste Alexander talking about that, but now we have John Vidal, who is the former director of the environmental section of The Guardian, and he will tell us more about this. I don't know, John, is there?
Hi, greeting. Can you hear me?
Yeah, hello.
Hey, Fiore, fantastic. What a wonderful meeting you're having. And there are so many people here I'd love to talk to individually and hear their stories. This is a dream to have all these people in one place. And it's my only regret is I cannot get to Marseille. I'm stuck in Wales, which is a country on the edge of the universe. And we are COVID restricted. So next time, and may there be many more. It's so important that this meeting is taking place now, and it's so timely, and it's so intellectually important, because there's never been a greater chance to reform conservation completely, and that is exactly what I think what is needed. I started looking at conservation about 20 odd years ago, and I was actually terrified. The first time I came across the WWF, I was asked by them to go out to the Cameroon to see one of their one of their famous projects. And it was wonderful, all these amazing trees and animals, and we couldn't believe how wonderful. And then right at the very end, we were sitting in their car. There was a couple of other journalists with me. We were sitting in one of their Land Rovers, and we found this document which basically said top secret, not to be shown to the press. And it explained in very great detail how they were going to evict, in the next 3 weeks, how they were going to evict 5 villages from this park. And we were absolutely just appalled, and we wrote it up. We wrote eco-colonialism, and we made a sort of enormous thing about it. The WWF did not talk to me for the next 10 years, I promise you. It was a complete disaster for them. I think the poor man got demoted as well and probably fired. Anyway, but the point is, what I realized very early on was that the conservation industry likes to portray itself as a sort of fluffy, do-gooding, charitable operation, and it appeals to the widows and the people with the young people with money and whatever. In effect, it is a $1 billion corporation run by some of the biggest, most powerful, politically and financially powerful operations in the world. And what is also very, very clear is that it is failing, absolutely failing. I mean, they themselves are saying that the ecosphere is collapsing, that the climate change is now running away. They are saying that the forests are going. They are the ones who are meant to be saving it. They have failed utterly. It is a business model which would not exist in any other sphere. The more they fail, the more they want money. The more they want money, the more they try and get political power. It is a disastrous industry, and there are some extremely good conservationists. I mean, they're very good scientists and very good people. But the bulk of the international conservation community is still wedded to the old colonial system that we know best. We will tell you what to do, and we will run the shop for you. But the only other thing which just occurs is that the international media has also failed utterly. It is, as Joe was saying, there's very, very few pieces in the newspapers about what's been going on in the Congo Basin, what's going on in Mexico, in the defenders around the world, the mining communities in the Philippines, and so on, all the way through the world. These human rights abuses are taking place, and yet we're hearing very, very little about it in the press. The international media is very good at one thing, and that's showing films of wildlife, and they are getting better and better. And you would never know from the pictures which we see regularly on television how that there are any people involved at all. It's like a prelapsarian world of perfect animals running across wonderful old savannas and things like that. It's absolutely unreal what we're getting. And the David Attenboroughs and these presenters are betraying us, frankly. I mean, it's absolutely, now they're beginning to tell us about climate change, but that's taking a very long time to get them to do that. They have failed us utterly, and somehow we have to ask why. I mean, you've got two failing communities. You've got the failing media, and you've got the failing conservation industry. And together, they are really pulling the wool over the eyes of the world's public. So why is this happening? To me, as a journalist, it is actually quite difficult to cover what's happening in remote places in Africa or Asia or wherever. It is very expensive to get to these places where the human rights abuses tend to be happening. It is very far away. It is difficult to persuade news desks that they should invest a lot of time, a lot of money in it. It's only very rarely that you get something like the BuzzFeed investigation of 2 or 3 years ago. Absolutely fantastic stuff. But it's very, very rare. There's something else which is more important. I think that's the whole concept of conservation is to make it science-based as opposed to human rights-based or equality-based or political-based. They want to divorce us from the political issues. And so they will show you the animals, they will show you the trees, we will gain enormous ecological new understandings, but we will not get any understanding of how the whole thing works. The other problem is that the access to the national parks and the places where things are going wrong tend to be controlled either by these very large corporations like the WWF or the Conservation International or Nature Conservancy or whoever, or by governments. And the governments are on the same side as the conservation groups. And so they don't want to show you anything which they don't want you to know. And so it becomes increasingly difficult to get it. I'm not making excuses. Of course we should be out there. 2 or 3 things, good things are happening. One of which is the internet. The internet has brought together, just even today, all these amazing people from all over. I mean, there are a dozen stories here which I could tell immediately. We need more of these conferences, more internet, more access to people who are on the front line. You guys are on the front line. You should be helping us, please, to tell us those stories. The second thing is that I think that the NGOs have got to, the human rights NGOs have got to go towards the environment ones and vice versa. There has to be a new dialogue between human rights activists and environment activists. The lines between them, they're very cross. We don't really, they don't talk to each other very much, you get the impression. And there's always been a tension between human rights and animal rights, but I think now it really does need to change. I'm terrified about 30-30. I think that this is going to be a complete disaster. It needs to be hit on the head very, very quickly. All the indications are that were it to be adopted, it would lead to just innumerable human rights abuses, terrible, disastrous for the climate and for the forests or wherever. It's heaven sent to go wrong, and it will go wrong. Because it's in the hands of the wrong people. The only people who have really shown that they can look after nature in the last 20 years have been the indigenous peoples. I have to say that they know more. We the Western, the conservationists, the environmentalists, we should be listening to them. They should be telling us what to do. I mean, we have failed utterly. And the sooner we get out of these national parks in Africa or wherever, the better. So, thank you very much.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, John. It was a very enlightening talk, and actually, I would make a remark. None of the big French media want to cover this Congress. So now I think we understand better why, including UK media, and not only French, but well, French media are very busy covering the IUCN Congress. Thank you very much, John. So now we talk again about donors, big donors, with Robert Moïse, who is an independent cultural anthropologist from the United States, who has worked with big funders of conservation. Hello, Robert. No, we can't. I think you have to unmute you. Might be that the reason.
Okay, can you hear me?
Yeah, perfectly. Hello.
Okay. I just wanted to say that, let's see. Okay. I wanted to say that I could hear like a terrible echo in Celeste and John's.
Yes, we hear you perfectly.
Okay, you say you hear me perfectly, but when in my ears, there's an echo.
Okay. Well,
so in the conference, you hear no echo?
Yes, perfectly, and we can see you perfectly also. Okay.
Okay, I'll continue. So I'm trying to get my presentation.
Yeah, just remember you have 10 minutes.
Right, I know.
John has been very, precise with the time, so we hope you too.
Okay, I'll do my best. Okay, so this is my talk. What happens in the forest stays in the forest. The role of donor agencies and strategies for making conservation more equitable and effective. So where I've worked is the Congo Basin. I think everyone knows where it is. If not, you can see there. The first thing to explain is the place of the donor agencies within the larger political economy of global conservation. So at the top level, you have the policymakers. Then you have the people who take tax dollars and consolidate them to give away for conservation. Then the next three are really the levels that have created and maintain a monopoly over conservation entirely. And the bottom is the people who live on the land. The second context I wanted to bring up is the problem of violence and explaining the reasons behind violence. The conventional explanation of the conservation industry is that it's a few bad apples. It's an aberration. There's a small minority of eco-guards who have done it. And instead, it is a systemic problem, and it's instrumentalized, so on purpose, for keeping locals off their ancestral lands so that the parallel state, which is the corrupt elements within the state apparatus, can profit off wildlife trafficking, mineral extraction, illegal logging, and charcoal production within protected areas. And there's some activity that they do themselves, and the rest is they tax people who are doing this, so that if they allow you to do it in the protected area, you pay them money. This is a Congolese soldier, makes $80 a month through his salary, but he can make $500 to $1,000 a day by letting illegal coltan go through. Okay. This is just to give you a sense of what that parallel state is. Joseph Kabila, the former president of DRC for 18 years. During his time, he created a business empire that encompasses 87 companies. Okay, so this it's presented, even by BuzzFeed, et cetera, it's presented as a conflict between locals and eco-guards. But really, the locals are low-hanging fruit for the security forces. By harassing people and locals and arresting them, they continue the budget, while the actual poaching is being done by clandestine actors who enjoy state protection. And at the same time, the eco-guards are the low-hanging fruit, and what's being hidden is the actual people behind it. Okay, so in terms of donors, the donor agencies are dominated by what I call conservation hardliners, for whom fortress conservation is a foregone conclusion. Social scientists who could advocate for local rights are marginalized. There's also a distinct lack of communication between donors and their field sites. They're basically in the dark. They do not know what is happening in those field sites. They spend most of their time in the city, in offices. Their funding mechanisms prevent much monitoring. They're under heavy travel restrictions. A lot of places they can't go for security reasons. And when they do go, it's like what John was talking about. They get guided tours of the protected areas by the conservationists. Yet despite this total lack of communication, there's no ground truthing mechanisms to see what actually happens on the ground. So this allows what happens in the forest to stay in the forest. So the donors are very unaware of the abuses, the debilitating effects protected areas have on economy, well-being, and cultural reproduction, and the actual people who are doing the poaching and the mineral extraction, etc. So what to do about it? The institutional matrix for global conservation, which is those three that I pointed out, donors, big conservation NGOs, and state conservation authorities, have a complete monopoly over policy and practice on the ground. Given their vested interests, it seems unlikely that they will have the political will or capacity to institute any effective reform. This resistance has become a severe handicap in the current political environment in which, for instance, in the U.S., you're now supposed to obtain free, prior, and informed consent of local people. So those who are supporting the rights of local people have to look elsewhere if they want reform. And so I think in terms of strategies, it's important to look at foreign aid agencies of donor governments, so the ones a step above the actual, what we call donors, the legislatures that control their funding, and the citizenries, the taxpayers who are financing all this, who are being deceived by the media about what their money is used for. And so all of these other stakeholders have to be educated on the dispossession that occurs when PAs are created, the violence that is used against them so that corrupt elements within the state profit off of illicit extraction, and also that there is an alternative. Many donor people, many political people say that, well, if there's an alternative to WWF, let us know what it is. But there's none. It's the only game in town. They're the only people doing it. And so it's our obligation to educate everyone, the publics, the donors, that there are indeed alternatives that have been working, that can work, and that can be integrated into some kind of eventual solution. The long-term goal should be to democratize conservation. The agencies that make conservation policy and practice should be independent, completely independent of the conservation industry. They should work with actors on the ground, NGOs, local communities. There should be direct and ongoing communication between the global actors and the local actors, both for making policy and day-to-day management. If you could create such a situation, what happens in the forest become common knowledge and serve as a basis of change in policy and practice. I think that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Robert. Perfect timing. Thank you very much, Robert. So unfortunately, we are 1 hour in delay, so we are going to skip the questions. For now, we will put everything at the end in the debate. We have seen the role of conservation organizations in the violation of human rights. We have seen what happened on the ground, what a protected area means for the people. We have seen what is our role, the role of media that creates stereotypes and don't cover the important things, and the role of donors. These things are funded by international donors, including our own countries. Now we are going to pass to the session 2, for which I invite Alice Beriot from Igapo project. C'est elle qui va faire la médiation.
She will do the mediation for the next session. Hello, everybody. My name is Alice Beriot. I still represent the Igapo project, which deals with defending Indigenous peoples' rights. We work on various issues involving the environment, and we have a socio-economic approach. We hope that our approach is not colonial. That is why I am moderating this session. So I would like to thank the organizers for their invitation, for having organized this event. Joe said before that it was a massive amount of work, so thank you to all the volunteers and non-volunteers. We can give them a big round of applause, that's for sure. And we would also like to thank Minority Rights. So without further ado, we will open session 2, which is called Decolonization Perspectives, which will enable us to talk about decolonization. So I think that we've spoken about a lot this morning, and the conservation as devised by the West leads to the great violation of human rights, a massive violation of human rights, and it's a smokescreen. We have seen that this conservation does not respect culture, knowledge, relationships that Indigenous people have with the land. And they deny, the existence of these people is denied. So we saw that this policy, this thinking, is derived directly from colonialism to impose its presence physically and culturally, and to implement a natural solution which is oppressive. So I went to a conservationist site, an NGO. So I wasn't going to say the name, and it was called African Parks. So this is an NGO which creates national parks in Africa. And this was particularly eye-opening for me. This NGO manages 19 parks in Africa and declares in its introductory text wishes to maintain wildlife and last African wild spaces by all means to protect parks and wildlife. So there is no mention of humans or people in this. It also remains particularly attentive to economic development and reduction of poverty of neighbouring communities. So this is a particularly paternalist tone, and I think it should help enable us to come to question, or there's a particular word, a particular term that is used, it says surrounding communities. Obviously this is a colonial approach, and what it means is pushing humans to the edges of the land, the people who've always lived on this land, and this because they want to invite tourists into the park. So it's a story amongst others, unfortunately, in history, but there have been many witness statements, too many to count. And when it comes to the West, there are two worlds. I would like to give you a quote from Bruno Latour. So there's the world in which we live and the world that we live from. So the first extract pillages the first and on occasions rapes and destroys the second. The first bans slavery in order to perpetuate this elsewhere. Likewise, they say it is necessary to save what we call nature with an idealistic vision by imposing its authoritative and coercive approach on others, negating other identities. This is unequal and oppressive. These conservation approaches must be revised and condemned. Above and beyond the vital interest of bringing about equality with Indigenous people and creating social justice, we must recognize the primary inhabitants of these lands are those who have the solutions. Yes, solutions. They are multiple, like the communities. We live in an imperial system which has enabled us to exploit these lands for our benefit. So the minority influences the majority, but the Indigenous people have a respectful relationship with the land and the forest, with the living world. which protects and preserves nature and means that we must think about our notion of progress. I would like to finish off my introduction with a quote from Alton Comet-Brazin, and he wants us to bring together knowledge and experience. Let's work together, let's be strong together in order to tell our stories. If we are able to, we will prevent the end of the world. Thank you, everybody. I think we will be able to proceed to the first round table in that case.
Welcome. Taneyulime, bienvenue à toi. Survival, où sont-ils? Madhuresh, il est d'ici ou Madhuresh, il est... Ah. Hi, welcome. I'm very glad to have the three of you here. Je vais peut-être limiter un peu le travail un peu des...
Perhaps I'll limit the work for the French interpreters. I will talk in English. Mordecai works on conflict resolution between humans and wildlife, notably on conservation in southern countries, in the southern hemisphere, so that's exactly what we're talking about.
Thank you very much, and thank you for having me. Is my presentation up?
Présentation de Mordecai. Ah.
Yeah. Thank you. Quickly, why we need to decolonize conservation in Africa and the rest of the world. We need to confront the challenges, and this is a good opportunity for us to sort of put them out front and center. We've been sort of covering or sugarcoating them for many years, and personally I've seen the damage that has resulted from that. First thing is the IUCN definition of protected areas. And I just draw your attention to the red font, through legal or other effective means of protecting these areas. Those other effective means, that's where the human rights violations is, disenfranchisement, extrajudicial killings, and the sort of violations of indigenous rights that we are talking about here. This, first of all, has to change, and we must reject what the IUCN has basically been having a free ride with for all these years. First of all, protected areas, they're a very primitive conservation tool, because when you say a protected area, who is it protected from? It's protected from the local people. So it's protected from its owners. And we must understand that the whole concept grew from Yellowstone, 1872 in the United States, and Roosevelt's idea. Roosevelt didn't know anything about conservation. So it's crazy that over 100 years later, we are still following the guidelines of someone who knew nothing and was just basically doing self-actualization. So this is the problem in a nutshell. In the West, conservation is very left-leaning, liberal, peaceful, green, inclusive, proletarian. But when you come to the global South, like Africa, where I come from, it is right-wing. It is conservative, it's militarized, it's green and brown fatigues, it's violent, it's intrusive, oppressive, and it's often racist. That's the other thing, the elephant in the room that we don't talk about. Conservation practice in Africa is racist. And the moment we accept that, then we'll start solving the problem. For the last few years, this has not been accepted, and we've tried to get all sorts of excuses about it. So this is one of the key challenges. So the first step to decolonizing conservation, we have to identify the agents. These are conservation organizations, And if you think back to colonialism, colonialism was commercial. It wasn't political in the beginning. Like British colonies had the Imperial British East Africa Company, those British East India Company, and these commercial entities that drove colonialism. And today they've been supplanted by the conservation organizations. So they're the ones who put the foot in. They're the ones, the agents who take the money there and extract what needs to be extracted. Some of the big organizations pursue a lot of things that are completely illogical, and this lack of logic exists in plain sight, like WWF saving black rhinos by moving them. I don't know any place in the world where an animal is saved by moving it. And many rhinos have been lost because of this kind of policy, especially in Kenya. Second step, we identify the colonies. These are protected areas and protected area networks. A lot of protected areas were obviously established in colonial days, I'm talking about Africa, but these days we have this new entity called networks, like we have what we call Peace Parks Foundation, some strange animal based in South Africa. They established transboundary conservation areas, which are managed independently of international borders. These are colonies. And this is again founded by Prince Bernhard of the Netherlands and Nelson Mandela. Nelson Mandela is very useful when you need to make something look good, and various other people. So the biggest one is the Kavango one, which stretches across Zambia, Angola, Namibia, Zimbabwe, I think a bit of Botswana as well, and there's the Limpopo as well, and they've got many other planned. Another one is African parks. Again, you need royalty, so Prince Harry is there, and controls a large network of parks around Africa, doing illogical things like transferring rhinos from the Western Cape in South Africa to Chad, resulting in the death of the animals. But it's not about rhino conservation, it's about spreading power and influence. Right now, for any of you who wants to grab land in Africa, all you need is a rhino. If you've got a rhino, you'll grab land in Africa, and you'll get guns to guard it, and you get a license to fence it. That's the fact of the matter. There's no people in Africa who are at peace if there's rhino near where they live. One of our earlier speakers said the same about India. When you live close to rhinos, you have no rights. You are not secure. WWF has something called Unganisha, this from their website. They've made some sort of country of their own between Kenya and Tanzania, which is pretty bizarre, sort of southern Kenya and northern Tanzania. And I'm not sure what they intend to do with this, but many African governments are also at fault because they're completely dead asleep as these annexations are happening under their noses and through unofficial channels. We cannot have a case where civil society controls land, especially across conservation boundaries, and guards it with arms. This is a very fishy sort of legal area. So decolonizing, lastly, identify the colonizers. This is Western capital and elites. We know them all, the donors, the billionaires, the corporations. They are not donating, they're investing, and we have to ask what is the return that's coming to them. So we have them all securing large pieces of Africa, living out their romantic dreams, and of having a piece of wilderness that belongs to them, and having this fortress mentality and fallacy that climate change, we can escape or have refuges from climate change in certain geographical areas. Climate change affects the air that we breathe, the water that flows. You won't have islands. When it changes, it changes. So this is what is sold to them. The land is what the organizations sell to them. So it requires violence, and this is what we must guard against, because all over we have these squads of rangers, armed rangers, and we have extrajudicial killings, including several in Kenya. And they push out pastoralists from their land as well. While fencing World Heritage areas, this is Mount Kenya in Kenya that's being fenced for conservation, and that's the fence being built. It even keeps out mice and rabbits. It requires dishonesty. That's why organizations can say an elephant is killed every 15 minutes. Yet we all know, those of us with basic mathematical skills know that that is not possible. media never shows pictures of black Africans in friendly, peaceful context with wildlife. Yet this occurs all over the continent. We always show black Africans at war with wildlife, not living with wildlife. And yet this is the reality. This is the reality that they don't want to show because they want to move out black Africans from their lands, purportedly making room for wildlife. Yet we have coexisted with this wildlife for thousands and thousands of years. These are all pictures from Kenya. John Vidal mentioned the media. There's so much violence in media and language. Game meat and venison is when it's eaten by white people. Bush meat is when it's eaten by black people. Hunting is when it's a white person. Poaching is when it's a black person. Exploring is when a white person. Encroaching is a black person. Ranchers, white. Herders, black. Travelers, white. Nomads, black. People, white. Communities, black. This is common. You've all read this. And the media also and messaging has to change. So we see common things like this called habitat encroachment, and that is called a riding safari. What's the difference? We have to think about the messaging. It's all over our media. So how can we escape from this? We have to develop our own standards definitions. We have to entrench indigenous livelihoods and aspirations in the discourse. We have to partner with the humanities. Tourism should be completely removed from the conservation discourse. Tourism is not a livelihood. It's a dependency. A very dangerous dependency that makes indigenous people depend on outsiders. It's slavery. We must protect species, systems, and livelihoods, not geographical areas. That's very primitive to try and protect geographical areas. We are now in the 21st century and we should know better. Thank you very much.
Well, thank you very much, Mordecai. It's a very, very great demonstration as an answer for this second session called Why Should We Decolonize Environment Protection? Je me tourne vers la seconde.
Now I would like to address the second participant, Taneyulime, who is part of the colonial people. From French Guiana. She is a writer and the co-president of the organization working for the preservation of the arts and culture of her organization. So thank you so much for Survival, for having allowed to the indigenous peoples to come and express themselves right here during this event. So we'll now change the continent, and I will be talking to you about the indigenous peoples for Guyana, but mostly of French Guiana. This is the French territory, even though it is outside of the main continent. So the short presentation, we are in the South America, right next to Brazil, and right next to the Guyana from the Netherlands. We have quite an important territory, 83,845 square kilometers of forest and 20,300 square kilometers of the parks. So we have the Amazonia in France, and this is also very important, and this is why for us it's really important to come to this Congress and to talk about the policies that are ongoing on our land. So we are talking about 294,000+ inhabitants, and 50% of them are very young, less than 25-year-old. So we have this demographic explosion for several years now, so we can find this different ethnic groups like Kalinia and Vainkur, Wainki and Lokano, and some other ethnic groups that probably I will not be citing right now. So this is a very rich region, the Amazonia, and that's very important to say. We have some gold. I will go back to this later. We have some rivers, and I will be talking about this as well. We have 8 million hectares of forest. We also have a very fertile land with some oil as well, and we have some sun. But we have 20% of unemployment. The green energies are not used today, so we have to know that the breakdowns of electricity network are basically an everyday a part of the everyday life. And we also have about 50% of our population who are living beyond the threshold of poverty, and it's the majority of the indigenous peoples, unfortunately. As for the use of the resources, starting from the 2008, we have a very important development of a lot of projects. A lot of projects are organized and promoted. In the 2008, we had this project Cayman. We also had this project called the Golden Mountain that was not corresponding to the environmental policy, and it was frozen for some time. And then in December last year, it went through the administrative court, and it was basically allowed once again. And we also have this project from 2020, which is called Espérance, Hope, and no one is basically talking about this. But I will be talking to you about all of this because this is violating the environment, and I would like to attract your attention to all of this. So the exploitation of the mines, open mines, this is a very big problem because we really have very big territories like this Golden Mountain that I have mentioned, and it actually was subject to a big mobilization from the indigenous peoples, but also from all of the population, because we are talking here about 1,500 hectares of forest that have been destroyed. And the cyanide techniques that are being used for the extraction are also having a very negative impact. We are talking about 195 liters of oil and 140,000 liters of water per hour, but also we have important trenches that are being created, and we have a lot of different waste of cyanide that are being created. So I can see that the roads are basically are basically very short-lived, because I don't really know all the geological side. However, I know that this is a big problem because we have this very huge pollution by mercury, and this is only part of this project, the Golden Mountain, and I believe that Espérance, the other project that has been adopted in 2020, will be pretty much the same thing. So we are talking about the expectations in terms of environmental protection, and we are creating a park on the indigenous peoples' lands. So this is not like the virgin land. So these are the territories where indigenous peoples live right now, and we are creating the parks there. But we are allowing the companies to come and to participate in the deforestation processes. So basically the companies can put the pollution, poisons in the soil, but also in the sea and in the water, and they can also create very important negative impact on the environment, on the fauna and flora, as well as on the local population. This is already a marginalized population. Nevertheless, no one cares. And this is also the indigenous peoples who are living alongside the rivers, and the project Espérance will be even more polluting as we expected. These indigenous peoples are basically living from fishing and hunting. This is how we live, this is our way of life, and probably also it's important to say that we are farmers. So we already are marginalized and poor mostly, but these populations will be even more marginalized, and the impact will be even greater, because as you can see, we cannot drink the water that is present here, even though the water is very, very expensive in Guyana. And just for the normal use of a family of 4 people, we are already talking about 460 euros every 3 months. So that's basically a very high price with respect to what we charge in France. So we have this danger for the fish. So the population has basically to change their habits because the water is polluted. So the fish is polluted as well because they consume the mercury as well. So the changes are drastic here. And even though there is this prohibition to use the mercury in France, starting from 2006, and in the territories that are beyond the continent as well, the pollution is still here, and the test has been carried out on the population in Guyana, the test of the presence of mercury, because we also have some other heavy metals that are here and that can cause different illnesses in people. The tests show that this pollution is still present. So the argument for all the companies and for the organization of these mining activities, open mining activities, is that they would like to have a better control of all these mining activities. They would like to prevent the illegal activities. So the problem that I'm expressing here is that I really know the context of Guiana. And I also know that this is the case for the border with Brazil. And they are also using this argument of job creation, and they are also using the argument of the development of the region. The illegal mercury use is basically an important deforestation, and they're saying that they're fighting against it. This is a huge problem as well. This is something that exists beyond the mining activities. And we also have the different programs that are existing here that are very, very expensive. Every single year, they take multiple millions of euros, but they change nothing in the situation. So we have this pollution of the soil as well as the water next to mercury. And it has been used by Guerrero. And also the indigenous peoples are subject to violence because of all of this. There are multiple sexual harassment for women and other different types of violence. So we have the drug trafficking and we have violence as well as prostitution. So I know that I don't have a lot of time, so you will pretty much understand that they have been announcing to us all of this as something very beneficial, like the job creation and so on, given that most of jobs are created for the French from the continent, for the important jobs. So the indigenous community is pretty much not concerned by all of this. And you can see the numbers they are right now here about the CO2 emissions, 455,000 tons of CO2 per year, and this is the oil central that we have here. And the use of the lands of the indigenous peoples is also a very important issue here. And we also have an electric station that will open very soon, even though for years everyone has been talking about the fact that we have constant electricity related problems, but we have mining projects and we have oil here, and we will be opening this electric central even though it will not benefit us. So it was not really sufficient for all of them, and I'm thinking of my brothers and sisters who right now in Guyana and Suriname are basically being robbed by companies like Total. And as I was saying, right now the indigenous peoples are still living from hunting, from fishing, and from farming. So that's how they feed themselves, especially in the center of Guyana. And they are living through this farming, but they're being told that the practice of the burnt soil is very bad for the environment, even though it represents 5% of the population of the Southern America. And we're not very many to do this, and we have this culture which is very close to nature. So this is the culture that exists for years and years now. But we have the new regulations that are here to protect the fauna, the flora, and the environment, but they will prevent the local populations from using and preserving their practices and their culture. So there's this ethnical genocide and ecological genocide, because people are being impacted by this pollution with mercury and with some other heavy metals. But also there is this cultural genocide as well, because we have to forget our habits and to adopt ourselves to these new regulations. So I would like to talk about it really briefly, even because we don't have some special recognition of the rights of the indigenous peoples, even though this process is basically moving forward. We still have some animals that we are we have been consuming for years, and right now this is prohibited, as well as for the fishing. For us it is prohibited, even though the ships are coming from abroad and are basically fishing, and whereas local people are getting fines for all of this. So once again, we are only 5%. So we already know what we are doing. It's been thousands and thousands of years since we started living this way, and we know how to live with this fauna in this flora, which are very diversified here. So I'm really sorry, I will have to stop you here. It's a very interesting story and a very interesting testimony and a perfect demonstration of the application of the colonial practices by the continental France, that is basically managing the peripheral territories that they have obtained through the colonization this way. Thank you so much. And now I would like to give the floor to Madhuresh Kumar, who is the National Coordinator of NAPM, National Alliance of People's Movement in India. This is the organization that is dedicated to the social justice in India, and he's also doing research at the University of Massachusetts. Madhuresh.
Thank you, everyone, and I'm happy to be here today. Many of my friends from India who you have heard since morning, they are not present here. I'm here because I have been living in France since last year. I represent an organization called National Alliance of People's Movements. It's a network of 250 plus grassroots movements across the country. And it's a coordinator for 10 years. I'm still a convener, but less active, given the distance. But I think for us, the question of what we are talking about, decolonizing, conservation, and in the years of my own activism, I think the conservation and development go together. You cannot talk about, you cannot only talk about conservation, you have to talk about development, because I think they both are violent. We have heard about the stories of violence of conservation, but a lot of time the conservation and development go together, and there's a violence of development, and I think it's necessary and important to talk about both of them. So the question we are talking in this particular session why is it necessary to decolonize conservation? I would say, why is it necessary to decolonize conservation and development? Because that's a really embedded process. You cannot talk one without talking about the other. I think, and the years of our own struggle on the ground on several issues, this is what we have come to learn and talk about. I think the colonialism, we think that it ended for India in 1947. We became independent. 75th year of independence. We are celebrating 75th year of independence. And my own association, along with many others, have launched a campaign saying that we will talk about the independent struggle, the struggles after post-independence, and what is the real meaning of independence. Are we really free? So overall, generally, we believe that we are not really free. We are not independent. We have not achieved the true freedom. I'm saying this as a general community. The stories we have heard since morning by my Indian colleagues, they are about Adivasis, indigenous people. For them, many of them thought that in 2005, when a Law Forest Rights Act was passed, at that particular time, they achieved independence. Because until then, 2005, before that, they were still living under the guard and the watchful eyes of the Forest Department. The Forest Department is the colonial institution created by the British, which were a plain, I would say, a lowest guard, a lowest level in the bureaucracy of the forest military or the forest governance. Even the lowest person had much more power than the existing local self-government institutions. So they had much more power. They could, and the stories of violence and what my friend here, Mordecai, talked about, we have seen that until 2005. We thought that post-2005, with the passage of that one act, which in its preamble accepted that there has been historical injustice with the communities living inside the forest, that they will be able to achieve some kind of a freedom, and they'll be able to live as a free citizen in India in 2005. It's more than 15 years till date. That law is on the paper, but its implementation is extremely poor. It's poor because of many reasons. because this is a law which gives power to people. In a way, when we talk about deepening democracy, it's about deepening freedom, then this law, if implemented in letter and spirit, it will give power and freedom and the true meaning of democracy within the forest, which means it will take away the power from the state, a state which has and which is built on the idea of eminent domain, because I think that's crucial when we talk about colonization and the colonialism, that the concept of eminent domain was extremely rooted and which dominated every sphere of the governance. And it's not only in India, but even in many other parts of the world, where a state basically owns everything. They are not trustees, but they are the owners of all the natural resources, land, water, forest, every piece of land and everything is what they own. So I think this is something, the concept of eminent domain continues to be challenged. There are so many laws which exist. We have led many struggles and fights to change those laws. We have Indian Forest Law, which is coming from 1927. We had a Land Acquisition Act Law, 1894. And we managed to change it after years of a struggle in 2013. The law gives power to people, but then that law is not being implemented now because it goes against the interest of the state. And I think there comes the crucial part. When we are talking about decolonizing, earlier it was possible to say who is the ruler, who is ruling us, but today it's not possible. And I think that that's extremely, because it's embedded in the state structure. A state itself is the colony right now, it's the colonizer. We talk about this in the hinterland, in the central India where most of the indigenous people live. For them, it's the state which is colonizing them. If the Britishers were earlier colonizing them, today it's them. But is it something which is just limited to India? We have heard about it, and I think it's not only limited towards India. And there comes the question, is it really possible to decolonize? Given that I'm here and I have more time on my hand, I have been studying and looking at is it really possible to decolonize and what is happening at the global governance level? The conference we are talking about, IUCN, I see it as a part of a larger agenda, which is embedded with the World Business Council on Sustainable Development, WBCSD we talked about, World Bank, IMF, then the WWF we know about. There is a World Resource Institute. I think we need to name them and talk about them. That there is a much larger bogey today, which has actually converted and used years of the struggle, used the language which people's movements put forward, and they have changed it. And see how it has changed. Today, social movements and the grassroots movements are called as civil society, that we are part of the civil society. The moment they call us civil, it means we have to behave in a civil manner. We are civilized people. We cannot abuse them. We have to talk in their language. So they have converted this. And this is extreme, and this is how, when we take a delegation to the ministries to talk about it, they will say, no, we will not talk to the villagers, we'll talk to you, because you can speak in English, you can talk in the same language, you'll be polite to us. You will not say what is the worst form. But then it's not only that, civil society. First they said development, then they said growth. Now it's growth index. It's no more about the human development index, it's about the growth. What is the rate of growth? Then they said about the fact that participation, and then now comes multi-stakeholder participation. And I think this is the big attack, which is we need to talk about, the multi-stakeholder capitalism. This is what is happening at every level, not only related to the conservation, but the environment, health, education, internet, data, society. The big corporations today, just to give you a sense, until 99 or early 90s, the education sector, education used to be at the global level, used to be a domain of UNESCO and UN and some bodies in UNICEF talking about the education. Today, with the entry of there is Microsoft, Facebook, all these big tech groups are part of this, and they sit in the multi-stakeholder bodies where the agenda is being set at Davos, not at where the multilateral agencies are. So multilateralism has given way to, yes, I'm looking at the time, I'm aware of that.
Instructions here.
No, I'm very focused there. So we are talking about that it's not health sector. And I think health sector is one went extremely relevant. Until 2000, before this century, in 20th century, there was a UN and the WHO, and we're talking about a pandemic today. But I think since 2000, the year Bill and Melinda Gates Foundation was founded, since then, the whole world of health governance across the world has changed. They are setting the standards, they are setting the agenda, they are laying down what are the parameters of the index and everything, all the language, the false solution we are talking about. They are developing it. And in situation like this, when the whole agenda setting is being done by them, is it really possible to decolonize? Because we cannot not talk about them without talking about conservation. So we have to talk conservation is just one slice of the pie. The big pie is everywhere else, and I think we have to talk about that. Thankfully, the last 1 minute, I think there are all these designs which they have, and they call it World Redesign Initiative, and they have come up with real fancy terms. But I think at the end of the day, as People's Movement, this is what we say: to implement all your designs, you have to come on the ground. And that's where we are sitting there. So if we are holding on to the ground, then I think they cannot take it away from us. They can change the laws, they can change all the design and the framework and the policies and everything, but at the end of the day, if you have to come to take our land, then you have to kill us before you take our land. And I think that's precisely the reason that we talk about not only conservation in Keystone model, but about conservation means it's people and everything else. People are part of this earth, and people are earth actually. Earth are the people. So thank you very much. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Madhuresh. I'm sorry that I have to wrap your presentation up each time, because it's very frustrating, because the 3 presentations were really great. And you do an important work as a scholar and activist, thinking at the crossroad of globalization and new forms of colonization. I think it's very, very important. Nous avons donc une...
So we have one last intervention, one last presentation. Our last speaker for this discussion is Dina Gilio-Whitaker, who is from the California University, and she is specialized in the indigenous peoples of the North America.
Dina, can you hear me?
Can you hear me?
Yes. Hi.
Okay, great. Yes, there's a
welcome.
Very severe echo here, as Robert mentioned earlier, but I will power through and do the best I can. Y Pisnaxielk, Isquis Dina Gilio-Whitaker, and I'm coming to you from the traditional and unceded homelands of the Ahashiman Nation in what's currently called San Clemente in Orange County, in what's currently called California. I teach American Indian Studies at California State University, San Marcos, where I teach courses on environmentalism and traditional ecological knowledge. So this is all very close to me, and it's a field of specialization for my research about conservation and environmental justice for indigenous people. So conservation, to address the question directly, it needs to be decolonized because it was born out of the colonial domination of indigenous peoples, as has already been mentioned more than once. The roots of conservation originate in the U.S. with the establishment of the first national park, Yellowstone, in 1872. Yellowstone was the homeland of the Blackfeet and numerous other indigenous nations who had occupied the land for thousands of years. The relentless and rapid influx of settlers into indigenous homelands beginning in the eastern part of the continent meant not only relentless urbanization and the loss of natural habitats, but continual war on indigenous people. And this gives birth to a growing anxiety about modern technological life in the US as people are flooding onto the continent from Europe during the 19th century. And so this was combined with a very Eurocentric view about North America as a virgin wilderness, which is untouched by human intervention, which we know by now is a complete myth. It was a story that was ultimately used to dispossess indigenous peoples of the land and became embedded in the American legal system. So it's very much alive in the American system today. These the logics that descend or originate from this virgin wilderness myth. So wilderness was thus thought of as places without humans, which meant that the humans who were already there needed to be removed. They needed to be expelled. What's that word? Kicked out, basically. And this creates the model for conservation on a global scale as we know it today, fortress conservation. The myth of untouched wilderness has led to the ceasing of indigenous land management practices and a concept of the land that the land should be allowed to grow wild. So not only is it a system of injustice for indigenous peoples because they're forcibly, very violently removed from the land in order to make room for foreign settlement onto indigenous lands, but it's tied up with the separation of indigenous peoples from their land practices. So indigenous knowledge systems recognized, however, that when land was allowed to remain untended, things became out of balance ecologically, especially when cultural burning practices became outlawed. And the colonial banning of indigenous land burning has meant over a century of forest mismanagement on this continent and has led us to where we are at now in the West, with the kinds of super fires that we're now experiencing, which are exacerbated by climate change. So there's another myth going on here, and it's the myth that we see in the media about these dramatic fires being caused by climate change, but that's actually really not an accurate way of presenting that story. It really originates from the mismanagement of forests through allowing them to grow wild. And now that we have climate change upon us, which it just intensifies the bad conditions that have been created for over a century. And we have early conservationists like Gifford Pinchot and Aldo Leopold to thank for this problem. These are people who, in the world of conservation studies, environmental studies, they are venerated, they are upheld as being the founders of modern conservation. They are celebrated as people who brought a new kind of land ethic to the land, but it's all pretty much a big lie for a number of reasons, and not the least of those reasons is because it's these guys who were the first employees of the United States Forest Service that advocated for the policies of banning indigenous burning, especially here in the West. I live in California now, where we have numerous, I've lost count of the fires that are currently burning and burning down entire towns and toxifying the air all over the state, even all over the continent. You had the smoke from the fires in going 3,000 miles across the continent and making very dangerous conditions in New England, in the eastern New England seaboard states. So it's finally beginning to occur to forest managers, scientists, and conservationists in the US that for millennia, indigenous people have had knowledge systems that created sustainable environments. The very definition of indigenous communities are communities that have lived on the land for thousands and thousands of years without destroying their environments. This is what makes them indigenous and ultimately sustainable. So the U.S. National Park Service is finally starting to work with tribal nations to gradually restore some of those indigenous land management to public lands. It's not nearly enough what's being done with the National Park Service and some of the other federal agencies, and much more needs to be done. But for example, fire on the land is not, so to kind of expose what some of these indigenous land practices look like, especially cultural burning or prescribed burning as it's sometimes called. Fire on the land not only reduces the kind of debris that makes for extremely destructive fires, it also leads to a greater water retention in the soil. Greater water retention generates healthier habitats for many kinds of species, including critical keystone species like salmon, which are now highly threatened as a result of all of this forest mismanagement for over a century. But there are numerous mechanisms for restoring indigenous peoples to these lands, and that's really what we're talking about here, is restoring indigenous jurisdiction over their homelands, including collaborative management, co-management regimes, land trusts and land conservations, and just straight up land returning land to indigenous control through the legal mechanisms that already exist in the U.S. Ultimately, decolonizing conservation must mean restoring indigenous stewardship to these wild places, wild in quotes.
We have 1 minute left, Dina. Thank you.
Because it is indigenous peoples who know what's best for the land and what the land needs to thrive. And when the land thrives, people thrive. Because in indigenous worldviews, it is relationships of reciprocity between human and non-human worlds that assures the thrivance of all people. And that concludes my presentation.
I take this opportunity to recommend the reading of your book, As Long as Grass Grows, the Indigenous Fight for Environmental Justice, from Colonization to Standing Rock, and the same opportunity to recommend the book you wrote, Mordecai, with John M. Baria, The Big Conservation Lie. Malheureusement, 2 ouvrages que je suis en train de recommander, écrits par Dina et Mordecai, qui n'ont pas été traduits en français, mais vous aurez eu les titres originaux. Un grand merci pour ce premier panel de cette seconde session. Thank you very much. Thank you. Nous allons donc démarrer cette...
So we'll make a start and carry on with the second roundtable, which is called Our Earth, Our future, so the role of indigenous people and their role in environmental protection. So I will leave the floor to Juan Pablo Gutiérrez, who is here on my left. He is an activist, a photographer, an ONIC representative, which represents indigenous people in Colombia, and a member of the Yucta indigenous population. Hello. So I will do the presentation in French because I didn't know there would be interpreters. So I prepared my presentation in French. Thank you for being here today. Thank you to Survival for having invited me today. If we are here today, it is to talk about the emergency to decolonize conservation and nature. I'd like to talk to you about the importance of indigenous people when it comes to environmental protection. I would like to start by giving you a presentation which will highlight the pertinence of colonization in general and conservation in relation to nature and indigenous people. Generally speaking, we have the impression that the world is something natural, something that is handed to us on a plate, and we have a feeling of nature, but in reality, this image is much more complicated. Most of the time, we are not aware of everything going on behind the scenes. The world in which we live in, which involves everything, well, the world is divided into the north, the south, indigenous people, and so on and so forth, in order to send us in a certain direction and create a certain colonization of thought. So first of all, we will talk about indigenous people, and the story goes that these are the descendants that lived in a place when other people arrived and were therefore colonized. So this official definition of what indigenous people are shows that there's a notion of indigenous people which is intrinsically linked to colonization. Because without colonization, it wouldn't have been necessary to categorize a certain part of the population as indigenous. But given that colonization happened, it became necessary to invent a new category of people by the colonizers. That means that everything that we are familiar with, that we know in relation to indigenous people, is an invention which has been done from outside of the indigenous world. And this has been widely accepted. And so it is something that happened, it is because of colonization. As such, we can therefore say that indigenous people were born from colonization, and it was the colonizer that did so in order to organize the land and the world according to their vision. Moreover, when it comes to the vision of indigenous people, when they are the subjects, when they see themselves, we consider ourselves as people, as human beings. And for us, we're not indigenous people. We're just people, we're human beings, given that in reality, this label of indigenous and non-indigenous is a Western invention. Perhaps you might say that there are a lot of indigenous people that consider themselves as so, and it's true. But in reality, since the philosophers of colonizers This is part of the adaptation of categories of social representations and these conventions that were invented by non-Indigenous people. Now, this is a product of a colonization, so a colonization of thought even. This colonization of the world, which is still represented as normal, should be analyzed more deeply, because we need to reformulate notions. So Indigenous people have also officially been called people who are wild, savages, and this is also erroneous because in the Americas there were no wild tribes, there were just people who lived there. And these were people who have subsequently been called barbarous and savage. In order to, we need to differentiate this to reaffirm a positive model. It is important to remind you that these savages, in inverted commas, protect 80% of biodiversity left in the world, but I'll come back to this later. The second notion that I'd like to talk to you about is nature, obviously. And the way that nature is considered currently in society. This is also been something that's been invented by Western society. And since the colonization of thought, for example, nature is everything to Indigenous people because it contains the elements that make life on Earth possible. It's a fundamental universe that must be taken care of, which must be loved, given that we are entirely dependent on nature to survive. And when it comes to modernity and the Western world, nature has become a resource to be exploited. Nature has become something that is at the mercy of human beings in modern society. This invention of nature, which I'm talking about, is the subject or was created following a fracture in human history. And René Descartes came up with a philosophy, and so he separated the essence of human beings from nature. As such, he made man the owner of nature for the first time in history. And this way of seeing the world is what we still see today. This is the way we think, and this is what we are currently experiencing. And this is why we are going through the worst time in history. That is to say, a climate change, a climate crisis, and a possible extinction of our own race because of this human progress, in inverted commas. To go back to what I was supposed to be talking about, which is the decolonization of conservation, it is urgent to decolonize the notion of nature. First of all, decolonize what we think about nature and the way that it is considered from a modern point of view. Next, we must envisage decolonization of protection of nature. If we only decolonize natural protection, but if we still consider nature in our modern way, it will be useful. It will be useless. Sorry. Next, we must decolonize the notion of Indigenous people, and this has been imposed by the arrogance of modernity. We must decolonize this idea of a savage, and this is how Indigenous people have been seen, and it's absolutely false. These are savages, in inverted commas, currently protect 80% of the remaining biodiversity on the Earth, not because they've had the opportunity to have the richest land, but contrary to modern society, in inverted commas, they know how to preserve it. And as such, we can redefine what we mean by savage or wild people in history. We must decolonize protection of nature, but in order to achieve this, we must first and foremost decolonize the conception of nature from a modern point of view. Stop considering it as an object. Stop considering something that we depend on, but we do depend on it. And we must protect nature on a daily basis in our daily lives, through our lifestyle, and not by creating protected areas like world governments are trying to sell to us at the moment, as they will do during the conference here in Marseille. We must also decolonize the idea of indigenous people. We must stop looking down on these people, but there's also a romantic notion through which indigenous people have been considered more recently. We must see them as protectors of nature, and I say that because in reality, in the day-to-day life of indigenous people, we don't see ourselves as protectors, guardians of nature. We don't say to ourselves, I'm a guardian of nature. This is, again, another model, a new category that has been imposed through colonization of thought, and this idea has become common. It has come from the perspective of societies who have destroyed nature. Again, it's an external point of view. Perhaps you can summarize, running out of time. So it is this desire, so all of this is part of the desire to reconfigure everything. So it is the importance of indigenous people are lessened in figures because colonization has happened, but we were never colonized in thought, and 80% of biodiversity on the Earth is in our land. In spite of a global crisis and climate change, it means that we can all live on this planet still, thanks to the existence of indigenous people. Thanks to them, we can still breathe. So, to conclude, it seems that, we can see that it is vital if we really want to progress and to decolonize land, but decolonize thought, to see things from a different point of view. For example, protection of nature is an invention that has been imposed by those who destroy it. Human rights is something that's been imposed by countries who enslave other countries. The nation state and democracy are things that have been invented by the societies who lived through feudalism. And the government wants to protect 30% of the planet to fight against climate change. Is a parody in history because it's a means of distracting the public, because in reality these places are still protected. They're protected by indigenous people who have been living there since the dawn of time and have enabled the nature to be preserved. And this 30-30 measure is a means of distraction to divert attention from those who are responsible for climate change. Let's say industrialists in a capitalist system which destroy nature in order to function. So I'll finish off with this. It's a reason for these new categories and these new ideas that become current and we consider natural. And so this idea of protecting nature makes up our world. Currently, these ideas are threatening our existence, and it is necessary to look to decolonization, to leave this modern matrix, to enable us to come back to what is important, to what is fundamental. Thank you very much for your attention. Thank you, Juan Pablo. I think that is exactly what we needed to hear, to hear about decolonization of thought and decentralization of thought also. I think this also involves a certain number of notions which are fundamental, but which we don't call into question at all. And I would like to include myself in that category, so thank you very much. I now give the floor to Lanka Madhuresh from the Coahuila Panama, from Gulumapu, and currently located in Chile. Lankirai is an activist in the Mapuche movement, and she currently lives in Germany.
Mari Mari Compuche, Mari Mari Lamien, Mari Mari Puguenui, Knie Kume Chalin Kupale Kom Kubichafe. Bueno.
Thank you very much to everyone here. I give you my greetings to the people that are fighting. I would like to say hello to all the peoples who are the resistance, the global resistance, to all the people who are in jail, to all the killed people. Berta Cáceres, for example, a woman killed by defending a kid in Honduras. Another one who was killed in Chile for defending his territory. I would like to say thank you to all the people who are resisted before me, because this has been possible for me to be here today. Thanks to that. Especially I would like to say hello to the indigenous people from Brazil who are fighting now in their camps to defend their land. This is happening right now. More than 6,000 brothers and sisters in a camp, and they're trying to take the genocide Bolsonaro to the International Court of the Haya. I say hello to them. Before starting, I would like to talk about a little bit about me, to give you a context. I always say that I am a Mapuche woman with a Chilean passport, and I say that because I want to show that I wasn't born in Chile, but Chile was born in my land. This is not my idea. It is a phrase from my indigenous movement, which is trying to show the colonial nations that were born in our lands. The Mapuche people are living in the south of Chile and Argentina. We are divided by the frontier, a colonial frontier. And for that reason, for me, this is an act also of visibilization. This way of presenting myself, introducing myself of a Mapuche with a Chilean passport, because it's a questioning the normality. I will say in a very short story, which are the Mapuches. The Mapuches, the Spanish people couldn't dominate us. They had to trade with us. They have to make an agreement with us. They recognize us as an independent nation with more than 10 million of hectares. The Chilean government, the colonial Chilean government, was obligated to make agreement with us, and they recognize us as not having dominion over us, as not having dominion over the Sabidos River. We were a nation without a state. We had our organization, our own lands, our communal organization, and this is important to tell, because now we think about this around colonial states, because we think that before that there were no other ways of thinking, and this is an exercise to let us think that before the suffering of these nations divided by frontiers, there were before some other ways of government and some other ways of being related to the land. I was born in a indigenous reduction. I was born in a Mapuche community in Ramon Painemal, and this is a community because I was lucky, thanks to the fights of growing up in a land that was not privatized. It was a land that belonged to all the community, but we had a dictatorship, and in 1979 we had a decree that divided the community, that had an intervention in the community, because the idea was to introduce the indigenous lands in the market, and the private sector started there. So I would like to tell you, because we have heard many stories with common aspects, because we have a very suffering stories in common. And it is important to say, as a Mapuche, I would like to show two main things, two main projects, models that have taken us to our lands from the Argentinian side and the Chilean side, but we don't call it like that. We call it the Gulumapo and the Galmapo, and this is the forestal plantations in the side of Chile today. They were imposed by the dictatorship with a decree that promoted these plantations, financing 70% of those. And as consequences of that, we have contamination, pollution, loss of land, of flora and fauna, biodiversity, and food sovereignty, and so on. And the Mapuche communities from the Chilean part are fighting to recover those territories, because that's the main thing. Without lands, we cannot talk about autonomy, because we have no lands. And because of that, we have to understand that this is not just about giving us space, but about having our lands, the lands that were taken from us. And with the new states, there were partners for doing that. And from the Argentinian part, we have a project called Vaca Muerta, the dead cow. They have gas there. There are a lot of communities, not only Mapuches, but the Mapuches are well affected, and they're implementing the fracking, which is a technology prohibited in Europe, is prohibited in France and in Germany. I tell about these countries because I am here now, but there are Germany companies involved. There are French companies involved, Total, I think, involved in these projects, and they're practicing all their activities in our lands. They're applying those technologies that are here in Europe are prohibited, and that should be a scandal, a polemical situation, but it's not like that. You can see all the damage that is happening there. I get excited because of this, because I'm an activist, I get emotional, and I see all the people that are fighting. There are people who have been killed, they are going into jails, and my role here in Europe is to denounce, because all the richness that is in these countries, in Germany, because yesterday I was walking around the city, this palace, all the infrastructures is related to the colonialism. We have our colonialism still today in our blood, and we have to see this with our eyes. We have to show the story, the history. We have to take position, because we have to take accountability, because Europe is responsible. We have to take sides, because colonialism has not ended. It just changed its name. It is called now development, and they are imposing projects telling us that our lives are going to get better. We have treaties, we have bridge, and we have the Decree 189. We have a violation of the consultancy with communities, and we have to ask ourselves, who is the violent here? Who is taking the violence to our territories? Because when I go to some conversations, I just have a minute, I'm going to go fast. I always hear we're going to protest pacifically, but we never been violent people. We never invited nowhere. We just been living until colonizers came, and they're still destroying us. I would like to say also, since we are talking about alternatives, I think that one of the most important things is to change the mindset and say that the indigenous peoples is not a story only, because we have another philosophy, another way to see the world, in which is a plural world. I'm not saying this only because it occurs to me. There are many indigenous leaders who are saying that it means that we don't exist just as human beings, but there are also animals, also plants. And I was born in my community, and we talk about the Guiana, which are the places, the sacred places to us. And the Western world doesn't understand that. It is the first alternative coming from the indigenous people, to see the world in another way. I'm going to stop here. I wrote many, many things, but I think it's very difficult to talk about this in just 10 minutes, but I would like to pass the message of hope. Because listening to all these stories, we one stay like, what can we do? But we can do many things, especially in these territories in which are the companies working. There are all these organizations that we mentioned today, and we have to call the attention for this, because they are meddling, because climate change, the destruction of the earth. For example, as one sister says, they're killing our earth, and it's going to be back to us. And we have to stay together, we have to join efforts, and we have no alternative. And I invite you, to all of you, to join forces, to create networks, to raise awareness, to give space, and to participate with our presence, because the people from the global south has no time. They have been killed, and it is important for us to take this message home. And we have this calling that says, if we are hit 10 times, we are killed 10 times, and then we raise again 10 times. So we are going to be alive 10 times more, always. Thank you very much.
Muchas gracias por el llamamiento, por el testimonio.
Thank you for your appeal and for your very emotional speech, and also for confronting us with our responsibility. Thank you very much.
Virtuel Lottie Cunningham-Wren du Nicaragua. Lottie, ¿me escuchas?
Lottie, can you hear me? Hello, good afternoon. Thank you for being with us, even virtually. I'm going to introduce you in French and then I come back.
Avocate du peuple autochtone Miski.
Lottie is one of the founders of a human rights organization of the Atlantic coast in Nicaragua. In 2020, she was the winner of a prize winner, which is an alternative prize.
Parece cortar un poco.
The sound is a little bit broken. Can you hear me? I would like to thank the organizers of this event for the opportunity they are offering. And I also would like to greet all the participants. The organizers should have a presentation, a PowerPoint presentation, so I would like to ask them to show it. Lotti, we have already broadcast your presentation. Thank you very much. So maybe we can move to the following page. Yes, this slide. Here we are dealing with indigenous territories and of African descent, and also protected areas of Nicaragua. You might know that Nicaragua has an area of more than 130,000 square kilometers, and that it is in Central America. We have 15 parliaments and 2 independent regions. On the Caribbean coast, there are more than 305 indigenous communities. All those territories that can be seen on those maps are more than 23 territories that are commonly owned. Today I would like to share with you, if we can move to the following slide, I would like to share the situation of the indigenous peoples on the Caribbean coast of Nicaragua, so that you can maybe understand a little bit of our situation. We have collective human rights that are established by the political constitution. We have an independence bylaw for the regions and a legislation on ownership, on communal ownership. In this situation that I'm going to explain to you, we are going to share with you the breach of our right to self-determination, the vulneration of common property, and also the environmental situation and the lack of previous consent, the impact of extractive activities on the territory of the indigenous peoples, the criminalization that we are suffering as defenders of human rights in defense for the land and natural resources, judicialization of people who stand up for the right and environment. What was our role in the protection of the environment? In the following slide, we can see that in order to understand this, we have to explain that in Nicaragua there's a deep crisis of breach of human rights starting from 2018. All this also includes a series of events and accidents that were political and that modified the political behavior of the institutions. The police in Nicaragua on the Caribbean coast is characterized by a total control of the institutions. That means that We have a statute of independence, but they are infringing our rights, the rights of the regions. All this is based on a policy of interference in the regional independency and in the statute of the communities. And all that despite this independency legislation that we have for our regions. For us, that has really jeopardized all our habits and our customs of elections. The current government has created what the communities identify as a shadow government or a parallel government. That was a strategy they had in Nicaragua by the political party that had the power to really cancel all the independency of the communities and undermining the principle of self-determination. On the other hand, we are suffering from vulneration of communal ownership. There is a law and there was also a sanitation stage, but there was also an undermining of the political basis, so they usurpated ownership and natural resources, and all that had great impact. There were threats, there were kidnapping, killings. This month, on the 23rd of August, more than 11 groups were beaten, and this massacre had happened continuously. These attacks are trying to create fear among the indigenous people. You only have 3 minutes left, sorry. So we can now move to the role that is played by the indigenous peoples. Before speaking of that, I also would like to mention the role of the criminalization of the indigenous people. We had more than 60 killings and 54 injuries in this year. Nevertheless, the indigenous people are still resisting, and we are really doing something crucial to consolidate the basic organization in our community. The rangers are fighting against the weak people, especially young people and women. And so we would like to draw attention at an international level too on the efforts we're making. We also would like to lead a national and international campaign on the bad practice of exploitation to raise awareness on the impact of these illicit activities and on the breach of human rights. We also would like to speak to the governments to have an international legislation that should be binding for companies on reporting in order to avoid bribery and breach of human rights where these companies work. We ask that of Europe and North America, first of all. So this is something that we have insisted and worked a lot on. We have been trying to create relations and legislations that make companies be transparent, and the process should be easy for the victims too. And for this, we should really leverage the international relations. Thank you very much.
Mekozi Rufin, membre du peuple Baka.
I would like to welcome Mekozi Rufin, member of the Baka tribe. Mekozi, can you hear me? So we can't hear you yet. Perhaps your microphone is muted. No, I still can't hear you. So we'll have a look if we can have some sound, if our technicians can do anything about it. Should we move on to Lila and try with Mekozi later?
D'accord, merci.
Voilà, nous allons passer à l'intervenant suivant.
As such, we'll move on to the next speaker, Tokala Leeladhar, who is a representative of the Pasantenchu people who live in a forest in Telangana in India. Tokala Leeladhar is a defender of wildlife, of the flora and the fauna, and he also fights to protect the rights of his community. Hi, Leela, can you hear me?
Okay, we may have some connection issues.
Oh.
Okay, we can hear you.
Okay. Hello. So, good morning and good evening. I'm Vidal in India. Okay. We are from our home is Milan Forest in the state of Andhra Pradesh in Telangana. We are living across the Krishna River. And our life, we live in forest and we belong to the forest. We are part of the forest, belong with wild animals and the plants. We have everything here, and whatever we take from forest and we give it. Whenever we go to the forest, we collect some roots and some food, and we took back home and eat it, and we take some to the forest and the medicine. We collect all the medicine from the forest, and we plant another same place, and we got our forest ourselves. And the forest department people come from some different area, and they asked us to show what are the locations, and which was look very beautiful, and we tell them we are not sure this is our forest, and we have to no rights to our. And we plant more trees. What we in all the land. What we eat, the fruits, nearly 250 types of fruits, and we give the land in that, and then again they will grow very bigly, and again they will give the fruit to our coming generation.
Leela, can you hear me? I'm sorry, but we have a lot of reception issues. We may have to stop the presentation just for now, and we'll talk to you later. I'm really sorry, but we have really a bad reception here. I'm really sorry.
So the Chenchu, that is this Lila and the Baka, are really one of the most vulnerable indigenous peoples in the world. They are in the forest, live in one in the forest in India, the other one in the forest in Congo. We have tried, because we thought it was very important to get them to say something. They're both facing eviction from protected areas, but I think that we have a connection problem. So I give it to you. I think we are not going to try, and we can pass. Tu veux que j'essaye encore?
That was the last panelist, actually. Demande-lui si on essaye un des Mekozi, si on revient à Mekozi. Oh, sorry. Mekozi? Ah, moi je n'entends pas encore Mekozi.
I still can't hear Mekozi. No, we don't have the sound, unfortunately.
Apparemment.
Entendu conserver quelque chose, donc c'est garder la chose. Avec les conservations qui se passent à notre niveau.
Mekozi, je suis désolée, je vais vous faire reprendre.
Mekozi, I'm really sorry to cut you off, but I would like to ask you to start again from the beginning because we didn't have the sound.
La nutrition est à la forêt.
We were relying on the forest, we're depending on the forest, and this has been the situation always for our grandparents and great-grandparents. And right now, we really need a lot of papers in order to come to the forest, but we are an indigenous population, so we actually need to have some money in order to have these documents. How exactly can we have the money if this is not part of our everyday life? So for us, I would like to say that we have this one place in particular that we are using, that those are using who would like to promote the conservation. This is something that is of 3 square kilometers. And they're talking a lot about the green economy here. So if you can imagine this place, you would right now have tears in your eyes. So the law is basically going beyond all the logical reasoning. So they're not even taking us into consideration with all of this. But I just wanted to say with this, that right now we are doing a lot of work in this sense. Because looking at all the activities that are organized by Survival, we know that right now is more and more important for us to participate together with all the different stakeholders. Everyone is trying to sell to us some equipment, and most often this is the second-hand equipment or things like that, so the companies are coming here for that. But I actually would like to talk about multiple organizations who are also helping some associations. For us, the indigenous peoples, this is something that will help us a lot. However, for us right now, there are multiple difficulties. And the forest, this is something that basically nourishes us, feeds us. We have the wild animals, we have all the plants, medicinal plants, and so on. Today, we basically can eat normally. But we are human beings, just like others. So why should we be marginalized because of the environmental cause? The conservation, sorry, the sound is really bad. The conservation, this is something that is positive. We cannot really refuse it. However, we shouldn't take this term in a bad sense of this term. The conservation should be done while including the interests of all of the stakeholders. Who is the conservator here? We are the ones who are doing this conservation because we are right here. We are living in this forest, and we are not the ones who are putting some chemicals in the soil. We are not the ones who are polluting a lot and things like that. No, we are living together with nature, in harmony with nature. So if you are doing some other types of activities, this will be part of the destruction and not what we are doing. But I would like to thank to all of you for all the efforts, for all the work that is done. I understand that we are working with a lot of different areas of the indigenous peoples of Baka, and we know that there are multiple populations that are living here and that are basically reliant on our activities because we are here to help them. And I understand that today the connection broke down. Apparently I'm back. So I wanted to go a little bit further in this presentation. So this is what I wanted to say, but I actually understand that there's a problem with the connection, and unfortunately it doesn't work very well. So I was saying that we, the Baka, we are fighting for all of this. And it's important to discuss all of this because for us, forest, is the base of our life. So if today we cannot really come into the forest and live as we normally lived, we will not be able to live. We can have some money, but we cannot let anyone destroy our forest. So if there are some organizations that can do some follow-up and work together with us, support us somehow, we will be very thankful. Because people are coming just like to steal something, and this is the world in which we're living today. So they are basically coming to get some profits, to get some money, but before this was not the case. And now all the organizations like WWF and some others are really organizing very bad things here. Sorry, there's a connection problem. Sorry, there's a connection problem. Because I'm really, really sorry, but the connection is really bad and the sound is intercutting, so it's really hard to understand what you're saying. But I would like to thank Survival for having attracted the attention to the Baka population. So thank you so much, Abaka, for this presentation, for the few words that we were able to catch. And now we will try once again to talk to Lila. And hopefully we will have the sound as well as the video.
Très bien. Malheureusement, donc on...
So perfect. Unfortunately, we won't be able to have a Lila because there's a connection problem once again. However, instead of this, we will go on with the debate that was already introduced by the presenters from this particular discussion, and we will be talking about the alternatives. So we would like to try and join Esther Wa, who is the member of CAT, which is the Conservation Alliance of Tanasari. And this is the organization of the Karen peoples in Myanmar. Hopefully we will be able to join Esther through the video. And hopefully we will be able to do it before we start the debate and the Q&A.
So because of timing, and we are going to just listen to Esther, and then we will pass to the debate because we think that is a very important thing. So just right there, Esther, we have the debate, and then for the ones who want to stay, an apéro. For the ones who had the patience to listen, to go through all of this. So that's it. Because we are running out of time, and our translators are leaving. So.
Hi, Esther.
Hi.
Hi. I'm glad to have you here virtually. So I've just introduced you. So when you are ready to start your presentation, it's fine for us.
Yeah, please, a second.
You have about 10 minutes, I'm sorry, but because we are running out of time. It's been a long day of presentations.
So.
Okay. Sorry, Esther, you don't need to share your screen because we have your presentation and we are doing it right now in the conference room.
I change a little bit. I update my presentation a little bit.
No, I mean, you don't need to share it because we can do it from where we are. So you can just stop the screen sharing. Thank you. Maybe just stop the... Just close the document. It's okay.
Where is that?
Okay.
Is this already closed or?
Okay, you can go on. Sorry, it's okay. We managed to do it. It's okay. Thank you. You can go on.
Okay. So hello everyone. Thank you to Survivor International to give me a chance for this blog. So my name is Esther and I'm from Myanmar and I'm current ethnic. Today we talk about a grassroots alternative to top-down conservation in the Nidai region from Myanmar. So I'm current in the Nidai region. What I would like to talk about is the southern part of Myanmar. So in southern part of Myanmar, we have a current indigenous people there, and there are current ethnic people too. So for that, not this slide, the previous slides. No, not this one. Oh. Wait.
I can move forward, backwards, just tell me what you need.
Yeah, so from southern part of Myanmar, we have conservation line of the Northern. We are current people, we work together. So we call it conservation line of the Northern. So for that, we found in 2014 as a coalition of current community organizations working in the region. We aim to promote conservation of biodiversity together with people and protect the right of indigenous community. And then I would like to explain about the background of the southern part of Myanmar. It's we call the northern landscape. And on the other hand, we call indigenous the Nidai region. So the Nidai region, it is one of the largest areas of evergreen forest in Southeast Asia. Site of 70 years of civil war between the Myanmar military and current National Liberation Army. Over 80,000 IDP and refugees. The case fire is happening in 2012. It brought new problems and it caused between concession and conservation in the region. So for that, in our region is a lot of palm oil concession, a lot of proposed dam, and there's special economic, so mega coal mining and tape mining projects. Moreover, we face with the top-down conservation project is related to take the indigenous community land in the region. And the indigenous communities across the landscape, there are all grass conservation and models. So within this year, on February 1st, in our country, the military coup is happening. So after the military coup happening, it has created a new landscape of aesthetic theme. And then, so on the map, you will see this one is on the southern part of the Nidai region. So this one is we've seen a lot of in this Nidai region we call the northern landscape. So we have a lot of the indigenous conserved areas, and then it is overlaid with the key biodiversity areas. The indigenous current people across the landscape, they manage their forests, biodiversity, and their territory. And then they protect their territories, they manage they create their own indigenous community conserve areas. And then they have their local institution, rules, and regulation. And then they are doing festival, and their campaigns are used to sustain, protect, and defend their forests and territories. And then, so it is you are still in the second page. So can you move the slides, please? So it's you are still in slide number 2.
Sorry, Esther, we have, what slide do you need exactly?
Yeah, this one.
Okay. Okay.
Yeah, so this one is our such kind of, I would like to show such kind of our landscape, how it look like. And then next slide, please. So this one, in our Taneyulime region, southern part of Myanmar, we have many community conserve area. So the first one is we call Gomotwin community conserve area. The second one is in the southern east part of Myanmar. It is we call Sari Peace Park. So within our territory, we are governing our territory of life by empowering our governance institution. We are doing documentation and mapping on our land, empower and document communities on our own rules and regulations, knowledge and values, safety and biodiversity. We are defending indigenous people rights on customary land and forests from encroachment, displacement, and other development aggressions. And therefore, sustaining our territories, there are many kinds of activities that we are doing on that. And there, we are advocating for appropriate recognition of our indigenous people, etc. land, such as we call as like indigenous community conserve area. So next slide, please. So we have a lot of rare biodiversity and the endangered species. Those kind of indigenous species and biodiversity only we can see in the indigenous territory. So next slide, please. So this is the community are living with the forest, and they use its food, and they use it as for medicine. Because of the this, they consume it. It is those are the key of addressing climate change. So next slide, please. So this one is the community are doing their conservation activities. They have many different kind of the conservation zone, and they have their rules and regulation, and they manage it. Next slide, please. So this one is in our Taneyulime region landscape of life. There are a lot of mega projects, and communities are trying to protect their lands from it. To protect their land from they are doing documentation, many different kind of campaign activities, empower and strengthening each other. Send copy letter to the copy letter and meet with relevant government departments and relevant international complaint mechanism. Because of and community movement, the government and relevant agencies came and evaluated the project. That's why the company cannot work as they wish, and they cannot work properly. This is a move, and that is better. It is better than doing anything. So then, before the group, we can participate in the policy reform and advocate the government and policymaker. So then we can raise our voice. So after the group is happened, so, it is limited to do community movement and I guess the mega project conservation activities. Under the military regime, there is no rule of laws, there is no rights and no protection for just the forest, centralized resource control. There is no legal recognition of traditional and customary land rights. So it's like this.
So just for you know, we have like 1 minute left. Thank you, Esther.
Yeah, I just have 2 slides for myself to mention about it. So I would like to mention is in Myanmar, urban areas, people are faced with a lot of people have been killed and they're detained and arrested because of the military regime. And indigenous communities area, there are bombing and the military attacked a lot. That's why it is across the country. There are a lot of thousands of refugees and IDP. And the current the military are, and then we are faced with the COVID-19 case too. That COVID-19 case is the military is using as their weapon. So because of that, people cannot get the medicine, and then the military try to stop the oxygen supply for that. So for my last slide that I would like to mention and give recommendation to the global social movement and just organization and communities. So please stand in solidarity with us. And then to conservation organization, companies and others, please do not recognize legitimate or do not work with the military junta. And then international governments and UN agency, please support the movements toward a federal democracy. Please do not give diplomatic recognition to the legitimate coup regime. And please continue to support civil society organization and community initiatives that are continue to protect lands and resources. And then please to impose economic sanction of the military regime, including targeted sanction on military business, and suspend all investments, especially large-scale infrastructure and resource expansion projects. Until then, is lasting peace and power is developed under a new federal constitution, give local communities in the rights to decide on their own developments. Thank you.
Thank you very much. Thank you very much, Esther. The Karen people is a symbol of resistance against great projects and a kind of state oppression. Eh bien, c'est la fin.
So this is the end of all the interventions. Fiore and me, we have had to, unfortunately, interrupt the very interesting testimonies and discourse, because Esther right now is a refugee in Thailand for security. We also have 2 people right here who are exiled to Europe for exactly the same reason. So we have pretty much been talking to people who are being threatened for the fight that they're carrying out, the fight that is the fight for our planet as well. And the International Day of the Indigenous Peoples, and Christophe Pierre, who is the leader of the Indigenous Peoples here, has also reminded us that the problem of the Indigenous Peoples of French Guiana, this is the problem of everyone who is leaving the French Guiana, but also the problem of everyone who is living on this planet. Which is why I would like to tell you that we were very lucky to have all these testimonies today, because it's really very difficult to have all these people and to hear their discourse. So thank you so much for your presence with us today. Thank you so much for being with us during this long day of presentations. We will start the debates right now. For everyone who is present right now, for all the participants, all the speakers, you can go back to the stage. You will have additional chairs and additional mics. So please go and join us here on stage. Madhuresh, Vardaka. And also we have a last-minute intervention. This is something this is somebody who has asked the floor. So we'll go back to my notes. Milan Sekulovitch, someone who is representing the community of Montenegro. and he is from the plains of Sinja-Rivina. And this is the biggest prairie area of Europe, and he will be talking about the civil society movement, and he's part of this movement, and this movement is fighting for their ancestral land. Thank you so much.
Thank you.
Okay, no, it's okay. Maybe I'm too loud, but I'm from Montenegro. We are very loud people, and sometimes we don't need a microphone, so I forgot. Okay, I'm Milan Sekulovitch. I'm from Montenegro, and I'm a son of farmers on Sinja-Rivina. That is the largest pasture in Montenegro, and the second biggest in Europe. In 2020, the government of Montenegro, supported by NATO, decided to inaugurate a military training ground in Sinja-Rivina, next to two UNESCO World Heritage Sites, and within the Tara River Basin Biosphere Reserve and area protected as a Nature 2000 by the European Union, for the protection of particularly valuable species of birds that nest in these pastoral habitats. That is, I must say, that is a huge area and very important for pastoralism, and the government of Montenegro have a plan. First, have a plan to establish the protected area on Sinja-Rivina, and that project supported by European Union. But in one moment, they changed that opinion and declare that area like a military training ground, and that is happened 2018. Unofficially, but in 2019 that was official. But they do that without any ask any consultation with local communities, without any analysis about how that can be dangerous for local for health, for future development and stuff like that. Also, I say without any health evaluation, economic impact studies, or any consultation with local communities. The inauguration of this military training ground stands as a perfect example of the type of humongous threat many local communities in Mediterranean basin are facing still today, even they are approximately to the center of the power like the European Union. And precisely due to the great lack of public recognition for this system and marginalized people. In great measure, they consumer laws are not engaged to the states, which most of them consider the land and the resource within this common as a state property, not the locals who are there using them today, and they have generally enjoyed them for the centuries. Seeing the widespread degradation of rural commons in all Mediterranean countries are at the same time as a threat in importance for regional and global socio-ecological sustainability and human rights. It's obviously urgent to address them and to work to protect them and promote them before it's too late. Meaning of the Sinja-Rivina case is important for itself, but also much more as indicator of greater degradation phenomena and need of support to these local communities and at global scale, but also at the Mediterranean scale, that it's something thought to be more safe than it is. So if we protect Sinja-Rivina, when we fight for Sinja-Rivina in Montenegro, we fight for all pastorals in Europe and also in the world. like to say all the times, Sinjavina is not just part of Montenegro. I call Sinjavina the heart of Montenegro, but Sinjavina is part of the whole world. So it's very big honor to listen here these stories about people around the world, and we must send one unique message. Maybe I am in Montenegro, somebody is in Africa and South America, and I don't know where. We are small on one place, but when we connecting together, we become bigger and we become stronger. So our strength is in unity. So let's unite and protect the planet and protect Sinjavina and Africa and South America and the rest of the world. Thank you.
Thank you so much. Thank you for your valuable contribution. Nous allons pouvoir passer au débat proprement dit.
Now we will be able to start the debates with the questions, and we see right now there's the question, who can give the mic? There is this sir who has raised his hand first. Yes, so tomorrow we will be talking about a lot of things during the Congress of IUCN, and there is this one motion, a very important one, that basically puts a little bit of value on the indigenous peoples, and it's all from the point of view of the biodiversity. So these indigenous peoples and small villagers who are living somewhere in the mountains, we understand that this is exactly what we're calling upon you about, because we are going against this policy of IUCN, because they would like basically to somehow balance all the actions that are directed against these small autochthonous, the small indigenous communities and pastoral communities. And this was the first question. And the second question is that we don't have to forget that we also have indigenous peoples in France. And we have been talking about some other indigenous communities, but in France, this is also a case. So I would like to probably also mention that the organizations who are defending the rights of the indigenous peoples, in the definition that is right now admitted, even though we wouldn't like to contest the indigenous peoples in France or in Greece and so on, we would like to also mention this particular form of discrimination on behalf of the majority of the organizations. It doesn't mean that the indigenous peoples in France aren't particularly targeted by this negative impact, but there's also racism that comes into play, and the local communities are potentially the same, and this will be the same fight, for instance, in France. So I will probably now give the floor to the participants to answer the question that has been asked.
Very important question, and it comes back to my point that we cannot create definitions that are global, that fit everybody in every place. And even the definition of indigenous people it becomes problematic, because even in Kenya we have, I think, 40 ethnic groups in Kenya, but maybe less than 10 of them are considered indigenous. I'm not sure why. So I think at least at country level, countries should be able to define this at national level, because I cannot define what an indigenous person is in India or in France, and vice versa. Europeans should not define who is indigenous in Kenya, etc. So we should bring this down to country level. I think that's a very good point. Thanks.
Donc on avait une question juste.
We also had another question over there. We will be talking about the alternatives right now, so this is why it will be interesting to hear some questions about the alternatives.
My name is Hugh Govan, and I'm just back from 20 years working with the 12 independent Pacific Island nations. And much of what you've been talking about today rings true, except that there we're talking about the sea and the ocean. So instead of land grabs, we have ocean grabs. If you think that these tiny little islands have actually about 30 million square kilometers between them all, then a 30 by 30 represents a 10 million square kilometer grab from these independent nations. This is leapfrogging the international law of the sea. This is leapfrogging democratic processes. This means that those countries will have, the population will have less say over what happens in that ocean than an American NGO. I was going to ask a question, but because Ashish said, oh, there's still room for dialogue with the NGOs, but we've been trying this for 20 years, and all we do is bring the dancing girls and the feathers to the meetings, and they carry on doing what they're doing. I would say that there is a need for new institutions that are outside of the conservation lobby. We have worked with governments, and in countries where the governments are favorable, there is some chance of developing more favorable policies to these forms of local empowerment. Having said that, the NGOs are very quick to hijack our work. In other words, they find it very hard to allow empowerment of all communities by, for example, recognizing customary tenure compared to their model of working with one or two communities and spending a lot of money empowering one community, empowering in certain ways. So I would back up more Joe, I think it was Joe or Robert's suggestion of an independent institutional framework for this, but not forgetting that in some cases we might be able to get governments to work better. Thanks.
Thank you. On a une question ici, Valérie.
We also have one question over here, Valérie. I just wanted to mention, I don't really want to go into the debate about the farmers, but I also understand that we have some farmers in the developed countries as well. But I would like to speak not as a representative of indigenous people, because I'm part of the farmers, but my father was also a farmer, but not from the very same region. So I don't feel as being part of the indigenous peoples. But I believe and I feel that I have a certain connection to the land, to the earth. And I would like to talk to you about this experience from the perspective of learning, in order to try to probably bring people from the cities, because we were talking a lot about the conservation, and we have been talking a lot about the land, but we should know that most of the people in the whole world is living in the cities. And this is a big problem. This is the big problem because they don't care. They live in the cities. So they are completely in a different context. And the link to the land, the link to the nature is basically cut for them. So I would like to re-establish this link to the land, this connection. And this is how I believe it's important to create this bioregionalization, as Bill Moneson is talking about. He is one of the founders of the permaculture. So it means that we should go back to the land and start from the needs, the need to have the land, the need to have the plants, to have animals, and all of this for the health of everyone and of people as well. And for this, people from cities should go back. And some people would only wish for that, but we actually need to have the possibility to do this. So that's probably a common reflection, because we were talking about the alternative solutions. So this is one of the solutions that I see in the long run. And this actually strengthens the idea of the fact that this is the common fight, the fight for all of us. And I would like to add a short provocation. I believe that permaculture, this is something that has been found in the Western culture in Australia, but this is practiced by the indigenous peoples for thousands of years, but they don't call it the same term. But we are all moving in the same direction, right? Hello, I have a question. Thank you. I have a question that I would like to ask you all. I would like to know whether you think, and if it's the case, I would like to have some examples, whether you think that the conservation, the world of the conservation facilitates or probably is like a Trojan horse of neoliberalism and capitalism as we understand it, and all the mechanisms that are related to all of this, because we were talking about mining, we were talking about the exploitation of forests and of land. So I would like to know whether this is what you think, whether you think that this is the Trojan horse, and if so, I would like to have some examples, please. Yes, thank you. I would like to provide you with an answer. And yes, I believe that this is a Trojan horse. And I would like to speak quickly from my point of view, from my situation. We have been talking about this plan 30-30. So for us, it's 45% already. It's no longer 30%. It's 45% of biodiversity. So if we are going to 30%, so we pretty much will allow this neo-colonialist development to happen with the development of this oil and mining-based society. Thank you. Paulo, you wanted also to take the floor? Juan Pablo? Me too. I believe that this is something that we can call the Trojan horse. So it's not really a solution, not the true solution, because we always are talking about the policy of conservation, but the direction and the logic in way that all of these initiatives follow is not here to fight against all the causes that are destroying the nature, but they are focusing on things that have nothing to do with it, like the protection of this 30%. So if we would like to protect the land, if we would like to fight against the climate change and the global warming, we have to look at the causes that are behind this climate change. And they are trying to protect the areas that are already protected. They would like to appear here as the protagonists, and they would like to be seen as someone who is doing something. But in reality, this is the mean to destruct the global opinion, because they are not touching the roots, the causes, the sources that are behind the destruction of the nature. This is why I could say that this is the Trojan horse right here.
When we speak about Trojan horse, in Montenegro we have a situation where we are fighting with military, with Ministry of Defense. The Ministry of Defense is in every country the strongest with a lot of money. And we have a Trojan horse, we have a NATO. In first time, our government tell us that is military training ground just for Montenegrin army. But Montenegrin army is very, very small. And they take so much space, and that is the space for US army, for example. So that is not for us. That is for someone else. So that is maybe they speak about development of that area in agriculture and in tourism. But how? When you spread the bombs around and say to the tourists, let's go there. There is a very nice area with bombs. Do you want to go there? No, probably. And do you want to buy cheese or milk or cream from the area where is from bombing area? Of course not. And if you destroy, for example, 10 years ago, the government of Montenegro decided we don't need the army at all. And now they need the half of country for a military training ground. That is not a good way, and that is the reason because we don't believe in our governments, first of all, because sometimes they speak in the name of somebody else, not in the name of the people. So I really see the similarities between the colleagues speak about companies. I speak about government, because the government are not still represent the people, they represent somebody else. Some organization may be good, maybe bad, but when you don't protect the interests of your people, you're the bad guy.
Thank you. Alors j'avais une question.
I actually had a question over there. The young man with the white t-shirt, I think he was the first one. I'm sorry, I actually got the mic first. I didn't see you, sorry about that. Yeah, thank you. I just would like to ask a quick question. Of course, you have already shown it. The protected areas are a failure everywhere, and this is the failure that is here to hide the real problem, which is the destruction. So do you believe that we have to reform the protected areas or to completely abandon this model of the protected areas? So what is your opinion?
Thank you. I think protected areas, there's some of them that are now part of our history and our heritage. Maybe we don't need to, I've been talking about Kenya, I think we don't need to abandon them and completely destroy them, but we should not add any more protected areas. We have to come up with new solutions, because some of the protected areas, the people who are removed from there in 1948, 45, we don't know them now. So we cannot abandon those. We'll keep those protected areas, but we should not make any more protected areas around the world. Because even I forgot to mention, like one of the previous speakers said something about seascapes. Small countries are getting completely taken over. Like the Seychelles has been taken over by the Nature Conservancy. The Mariana Islands, is the same problem. So we cannot create these protected areas on landscapes or seascapes anymore. We have to engage in how we use resources and keep the rights of the people who are there. I think it's a step of civilization, but we are trying to pretend that we are not civilized and go backwards. Thank you.
Thank you. Est-ce que quelqu'un d'autre veut réagir?
Is there anyone else who would like to react about this question, whether we should maintain the protected areas or abandon them completely? Because we have a lot of questions, so we can go to the next one as well. Thank you. So thank you so much. I have two questions that are much more strategically oriented, based on what we have heard during this conference, and probably they will invite us to go to the next level. So very first question, whether we have some contact points of interaction with IUCN, because I believe that a lot of people are talking about it, so you're probably not really turning your back on them. And if we have these contact points, so what is the type of exchange that we can have? How exactly can we convince them? And also another question that I would like to ask is, how exactly can we articulate this? Because I understand that this idea is that this indigenous people is basically the population that is present everywhere, so the solutions are pretty much local, and everywhere we have exactly the same problem. So how can we articulate what is happening here? The fact that all of you have different experiences, but this is all around the same reasoning, the same cause. So how exactly we can find some answers, and what are the emerging answers in this sense? So these are two very interesting and very complex questions. I would like probably to quickly summarize them. So the first question, how exactly we can pass from the event that we are organizing right here, and most of us are in agreement on multiple points, and knowing that we also can establish different connections with the people who are participating in the IUCN Congress, some scientists, some researchers, and probably we would agree with some of them, how we can establish these contacts. And the second question, starting from all of these experiences, how exactly can we fight and act? So would someone want to take the floor? Probably someone from the audience. Do you have some elements for the reflection in this sense? So the indigenous peoples, we are quoting them a lot. They're mentioned a lot. And there's this well of integration. However, I have been looking for this in my notes, but probably someone will be able to help me Probably someone remembers. Someone says that it was not enough to say that we will ask to the indigenous peoples to contribute to the decisions. Probably this is not exactly what we want. Probably we would like for this decision to come from us. So probably the mentions, whatever exists that has been offered, doesn't go as far as it is needed. And the consortium that includes a certain number of indigenous organizations has already made some amendments to the draft of the project in order to try and go a little bit further. But at my level, I cannot really reply to the question of how we can create connections with IUCN. So probably I will leave this question to our participants. So we have 5 minutes. And yes, we have 5 minutes. In addition, we have some people here who would like to say something, and afterwards we will organize a short aperitif right here, so you will be able to talk all together. The idea is that all this conference is basically created through connections, through the movements of different people, and the French government is continuously organizing this Congress on the Nature. They are basically acting as if nothing happened, but we would like to show that there are some initiatives. We would like probably to talk among us and also to talk to our counterparts. And
du coup, c'est Simon, Juan Pablo, et après on finit. Je sais pas. Oui.
Simon, Juan Pablo, and then we stop, right? I'm really sorry. Yeah, there's someone else. But he's a participant, and I think that he wanted to say something on the topic, and later on you will be able to keep talking.
Question of do we have contacts with IUCN and all the other actors in this kind of edifice of bad conservation? And the answer, of course, is yes. There are even good people inside IUCN and probably even inside some of the other organizations like WWF. But the thing to really bear in mind about this is that none of these issues are new to conservation. The way that this is now being discussed is certainly very new, but these issues surfaced 30 years ago. And one of the things, the term learning to decolonize our mind, I think was absolutely appropriate to this. And one of the processes that we need to do that is and it's very kind of good to see and hear that the term the conservation industry being referred to constantly and consistently throughout here, because that is the way you have to think about it. And we have to appreciate that the industry, the conservation sector, whatever you want to call it, has for 30 years become extremely adept at dealing with criticism, with demands for its reform and demands for its change, just like any other industry, the mining industry, the oil industry, the big agri, big pharma, whatever. They know how to deal with this stuff. They know how to co-opt, they know how to subvert, they know how to distract, they know how to write wonderful policy papers, and so on and so forth. Everything to do, whatever has to be done, apart from actually fundamentally changing what they're doing. Their product is exactly the same as it was 30 years ago, and be under no mistake about that. So I think now this is why this, to me, and I've been working on these issues for 2 decades, basically, and this is why this, to me, really does feel like a change, because there are many, many more people from all around the world now discussing this, and you've all been a part of that. This has never happened before. And I think that, the one thing that can possibly change this is when these conservation organizations, they see this, they see what's happened here today, are bringing together unlike no other, criticizing the fundamental model and the product of their industry. So that to me is important. Solidarity and continuing solidarity amongst us, I think, is the one thing that can actually change this, because it's a power imbalance. When that power shifts back to us, it shifts back to the millions of people that have been affected adversely by protected areas. Then I think we start, IUCN and the others actually start listening.
diversité historique et géographique des peuples.
There's a very important diversity, historical and geographical, of all the people who were talking here, of all the speakers. So we actually have a very important community who have expressed their problems, the problems they're facing. We also see all the different advantages and resources because these people are living very close to nature and to the environment. In the past and also right now, we have had some international organizations, socialistic organizations who were fighting against the world capitalism, and they were doing it in particular for the social and economical reasons, but not for the ecological reasons. And I would like to know whether it exists or could exist, probably, an international ecosystemic organization where the indigenous peoples, with their common platform and their common strength, would be, so that to turn this fight against the world capitalism and all the negative impact that it creates on our land, turn it into the opposite direction. Thank you.
Bon, et pour répondre à votre question,
I would like to provide you with a reply to your question. It is true that the indigenous peoples, we have always, as I have said in my presentation, starting from this arrogant posture of the modernity, which is the one that right now directs our existence in the world and makes it logical, they in general have been classified as some like minor or marginalized. So we have always been minimized in the history of our existence as the indigenous peoples, starting from the moment where we started to exist etymologically. Then it actually happened that this model of the modern civilization, which is rational, between brackets, and the humanity in a whole, is in a state that is the most serious in the whole history, meaning the global warming and the possible extinction of the humankind. And for the very first time in the history of the humanity, the vision of this retarded, wild peoples appears as incredibly relevant, uniquely relevant. Not as a theory, not as something that exists in the library, but from the practical point of view, because this is a model that shows that we can actually live and consider from a different point of view all the living world. And it doesn't really mean that, and this is going back to the other question, that we are all going into the jungle and we will be living naked and things like that. No, there's no need to do it because the cities are existing now. But the transformation will come from this ontological thing, from this matrix, the colonial matrix that is ruling today, the Western and modern logic, and they have to start taking into consideration things, not only from this point of view, from this epistemological point of view that they have had already, but from the other points of view as well that are needed today to save the humanity.
Je crois que c'est une bonne conclusion pour.
I believe that this is a great conclusion in order to start the new chapter and to delay the end of the world. And now I would like to give the floor to Fiore. So the time has come to have a drink all together. Thank you so much to all of you. Thank you so much for having stayed after this very long day. I believe that this is the key moment, the essential moment for all of us to be able to meet together, to be able to talk about all of this. So this is not the end. This is just the beginning of this journey. And tomorrow we will organize a manifestation. At 6:30 we will meet at Porte d'Aix. And we will organize this manifestation for the environmental justice against all the false solution of IUCN. And tomorrow this is the inauguration ceremony of the Congress of the Nature, and Macron will be here, so I would like for all of you to participate. It will start at 6:30 and until 7:30. We will start it at Porte d'Aix, and we will walk to the Vieux-Port. So you are all welcome to come and to participate in this manifestation of tomorrow. I would like to invite to all of you to learn more information, you can find this information here in Survival International, in Minority Rights Group, and some other organizations who are working on this topic for years and years. You can find all the necessary information. Our Congress has been recorded, so you can find all of these interventions in YouTube and watch them again. And I would like to thank all the people who are here, all the participants, speakers, but also the interpreters who stayed until the end. And also, I would like to thank our contacts from the indigenous peoples who have prepared a lot of wonderful information. All of you, you have traveled, but people who were available virtually, it was very, very difficult for them. Not everyone was able to have a good connection. We have done everything in our power, but as I have already explained to you, this is the difficulty for these representatives of indigenous peoples, because they would like to have their voices heard as well. They have a strong resistance and strong voices, but it's really hard to bring them here. So I would like to thank all of them for having participated and for having prepared. Thank you so much to all of you. The drinks will be available over there, and my colleagues will be here to give you something to drink and to eat. Please enjoy.
On ne peut pas manifester au Parc Chano parce qu'il y a les présidents.
Why can we not manifest in Parc Chano? Because there's a president of the French Republic, which is why the prefecture told us that it was impossible to do it. So unfortunately, we won't be in Parc Chano. However, if we will be many, even in Vieux-Port, they will definitely see us. Thank you.